That one is recording. Well, I should have had this already done, but I don't.
The 20th.
Okay. I think I got everything on now. We're going to do something a little bit different today. Some of you have heard it, some of you haven't. So when this thing comes on, it's going to be loud. Don't get excited, okay? Don't get nervous. As we
keep germs down there.
we're recording, in case everybody wants to know, okay? As we prepare today, before I read the blessing for blowing the shofar, these are some notes from the Isaiah Targums. I don't know how many people know what the Targums are. Y'all want me to wait?
We're recording.
Everybody knows that the Septuagint was the Greek translation of the Bible, which was translated from Hebrew into Greek about 245 years before Messiah was born. At the same time the Septuagint was translated into Greek, the Targums were translated into Aramaic, and they were sent to the believers, you know, in the northern kingdoms in the areas that spoke Aramaic, which remember is just a dialect of Hebrew. These notes then come from Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, in the Aramaic Targums. And in Isaiah 27:13 it's talking about the blowing of the shofar. On that day a great shofar will be sounded, and those who have perished in the land of Assyria and those who were dispersed in the land of Egypt will come. So it's like the sound of the shofar is what calls everybody back. And then in Isaiah 18 verse 3 it says, to refresh our faith in the future resurrection of the dead, as it is said, all you inhabitants of the world and you who dwell in the earth, when an ensign is lifted on the mountains you shall see, and when the shofar is sounded you shall hear. Understand this is all associated with the dead. It's associated with the resurrection of the dead. It's associated with the calling of the bride. People understand. That's why we do that on the Sabbath day, okay? The primary meaning of the shofar blast is that of the coronation theme. It's a declaration of faith in Yahweh as ruler of the world. Go to Psalm 47. In Psalm 47 and in verses 5 through 9. In verse 5 it says, El has gone up with a shout, Yahweh with the sound of the shofar. Sing praises to El, sing praises to our King, sing praises. For El is the King of all the earth, sing praises with understanding. Elohim reigns over the nations. Elohim sits on his holy throne. The princes of the people have gathered together, the people of the Elohim of Abraham. For the shields of the earth are to Elohim. He is greatly exalted. So again, we're talking about him as king, right? King of kings, master of all masters, and so forth, okay? I want everybody to understand then, as we blow the shofar, it's not just some little fickle thing that we do just to kind of create some kind of an ambiance or an environment or something like that, okay? It's because it has a true meaning in the Scriptures, and we need to understand what it's for. Remember, Messiah said he is coming for those who are looking for him, right? Well, what are we to expect when he comes? Are we to expect the sound of the shofar? In the New Testament Scriptures, in the commentary, doesn't it tell us that Messiah came and there was a sound of a shofar as he went for his bride? 5 of the virgins were ready and 5 weren't, right? Those that were ready, they went in, right? Those that weren't ready, they said, well, give us some of your oil. What did they say? We just got enough for ourselves. You got to go get your own. So they went to get, right? And when they came back, what had happened? He had gone on in. And when they knocked on the door and he came to the door, what did he say? Depart from me. I never knew you. They weren't ready when he came. What we're trying to do is get ready. Try to be ready for when He comes. Baruch atah Yahweh Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'shemoah kol shofar. Blessed are you, Yahweh Eloheinu, King of the universe, who has sanctified us by His commandments and commanded us to hear and respond to the call of the shofar.
יברכך אדוני וישמרך. יאר אדוני פניו אליך ויחונקה. יישא אדוני פניו אליך וישם לך שלום.
The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace.
Okay. Isn't that kind of neat? In keeping with that. Again, now, this is, I'm reading from the Aramaic Targums. Remember, these are Aramaic translations of the Hebrew Scriptures 245 years before Messiah came. These are Hebrew thoughts of what the Hebrew Scriptures meant 250 years before there was any thought of Christianity to distort the meaning of the Scriptures. Okay? Isaiah chapter 4, verses 2 through 6. This is again out of the Isaiah Targum. It says, the wicked, they will suffer by the same law which the righteous enjoy. From Isaiah 42, verse 7. To open the eyes of the house of Israel, who are as blind to the law, to bring out their exiles, who resemble prisoners from among Gentiles, to deliver from slavery of the kingdoms those who are jailed as prisoners of darkness. What did Messiah say when he went into the synagogue in Cana and they gave him the book of Isaiah to read, and he read from Isaiah 61, right? I have come to do these things, he said. In Isaiah 58, verse 12, and they will build from you ancient ruins. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. They will call you the one who establishes the correct way, the restorer of the wicked to the Torah. These things all being true, then he who walks in Torah is among the righteous. He who walks against Torah is among the wicked. Boy, that's not very hard to understand, is it? If you obey Torah, you're among the righteous. If you don't, then what are you? Doesn't require a whole lot of discussion, does it? I mean, it either is or it ain't. And I guess everybody understands that we're in the process of counting the Omer. I say Omer just because it sounds good, but the Hebrew word is Omer. And we're going to say the Hebrew way today. I gave sheets out to everybody. I think everybody got one. I'd like for you to read it with me. If you haven't counted it, now remember, do we have an injunction in Scripture to count the days? We do, don't we? Remember, the Hebrew people, on the day of first fruits, which was last first day or Sunday, they brought a sheaf of barley into the temple, right? And they stood that sheaf up there, and the word for a sheaf of barley in the Hebrew is the word omer. So they brought an omer of barley into the temple, and they stood it up against the wall, and they said number 1. And then they began to bring one omer, one sheaf for each day, and when they had 49 sheaves there, then they knew that the next day was going to be what? Shavuot, which the Christians call Pentecost now. But that is, and he told us to count. He didn't tell us to bring a sheaf of wheat, he just told us to count. Though the sheaf of wheat is a way of counting. I don't care if you want to stand up toothpicks or however you do it. You're still counting the days. That's what it's all about. So on the sheet that I passed out, if you look down to where it says number 7 in our Arabic numeral,
Probably only one.
okay? Y'all follow with me, okay? Hayom, Shiva'ah, Yamim, Shahem, Shavuah, Echad, La'omer. Today is the 7th day, a complete week of counting the Omer. 1 week. Echad. Okay. That injunction has been done. Oh boy. In the readings today, we're going to be starting in Vayikra, Leviticus, chapter 9 and verse 1. Remember the word, Leviticus is from the Latin, which means the Levites. The Hebrew title of this book is Vayikra, which means "and he called," referring to Yahweh. We're going to be reading from chapter 9, verse 1. We'll be reading through chapter 11 and verse 47. We probably go ahead, we'll read in 2 Samuel. It's got some very interesting thoughts in it today in conjunction with this. But then we're going to read, for a half Torah, we're going to read in Acts chapter 14 through chapter 15. So we'll be in Acts 14:1 through 15:41 is what we're going to read. The name of the reading in the Hebrew today is Shmini. Everybody remember what Shmini means? The 8th day. Okay? The number for Shmini is 8066. Now, if everybody remembers, in the last reading, in chapter 8, in verse 35, we left Aaron and his sons at the door of the tabernacle, and they were in the process of being consecrated into the priesthood. Y'all remember that? And they were to be consecrated for 7 days, right? So then chapter 9 verse 1 stars out and it says, it came to pass. It came to pass. Those 4 words in the Hebrew is one Hebrew word. You want to write it down, the number for those 4 words is the number 1961. Chaya, which means come to pass or to exist. 1961, that is also the root of the name Yahweh. Okay? It will come to pass. It will. Remember when in Exodus when Moses was talking and he said, "Who shall I tell them sent me if they ask me your name?" And in our English Bibles it's always been translated as "I am that I am." And yet the Hebrew in that passage says what? Haya Esher Haya. I will be who I will be, is what he said in the Hebrew. That's what he said, told Moses. And then he said also, Yahweh shall be my memorial to all generations. Yahweh then is the name, the moniker, so to speak, that brings attention to him. And then in order to know who he is, what do we have to study? The rest of the Torah. And remember the word law, from Webster's 1828 dictionary, it says that the law is what? A transcript of the divine nature of Yahweh, and extends its authority to the soul of man. That's from Webster's 1828. Pretty good definition of the Torah. You want to walk in the nature of Yahweh, the spirit of Yahweh, the spirit of who he is, you walk in his word. Okay. Like I say, previously we ended with the consecration of Aaron and his sons. We left them at the door of the tabernacle. And notice up there, in verse 35 it says, therefore you shall abide at the door of the tabernacle of meeting day and night for 7 days, and keep the charge of Yahweh. The word keep there is the number 8104. And it is the word shamar, which means to what? Hedge about as with a hedge of thorns. Not only are we supposed to keep the charge, we're supposed to defend it. We're supposed to guard it. We're supposed to protect it. Right? That's what this word keep means. So they were there keeping the charge, 49:31 for the charge of Yahweh, so that they might not die. And a lot of times that word, keeping the charge, that word charge there can also be translated as the watch. So keeping watch. Keeping the watch. I think somewhere in one of the prophets it said something about us being called watchmen. Well, if you're called to be a watchman, then you're called to keep watch. And if you're called to keep watch, what does that mean you're called to do? Keep the charge of Yahweh. To guard the Torah. Why? Keep the charge of Yahweh so that you may not die. Where is life to be found then? In the word of Yahweh. The word is what? Yehoshua in the flesh, the word became flesh. He is life, right? Remember when he asked the disciples, are you going to go away from me too? He said, where are we going to go? You have the words of life. Where else are you going to go then to find life? So here in chapter 9, verse 1, we begin on what? It came to pass on the 8th day that Moshe called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. It's kind of funny. Remember, Aaron means what? The light bearer. So the sons of Aaron are the sons of the light bearer. And somewhere in the New Testament commentary, we're supposed to be what? The sons of light, not sons of darkness. If Aaron is the first high priest in a picture, then he, the light bearer, is a picture of the true light to come. And I think in the Gospel of John chapter 1, it calls him that true light. Okay. I'm going to go ahead here. We're going to come back and talk about this, but I want to read down a ways in Leviticus 9, and then we're going to come back and talk about it a little bit. It came to pass on the 8th day that Moshe called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. And he said to Aaron, take for yourself a young bull as a sin offering and a ram as a burnt offering without blemish, and offer before Yahweh. And to the children of Israel you shall speak, saying, take a kid of the goats as a sin offering. That word kid there means a he-goat. Of the goats as a sin offering, and a calf and a lamb of the first year without blemish as a burnt offering. Also a bull and a ram as peace offerings to sacrifice before Yahweh, and a grain offering mixed with oil, for today Yahweh will appear to you. So they brought what Moshe commanded before the tabernacle of meeting, and all the congregation drew near and stood before Yahweh. Notice he's giving them all these instructions to offer these sacrifices for the burnt offering, the peace offering, the sin offering, and all these kind of things. If you stop and think about it, all this purification process has to be completed before Yahweh will appear to them. Okay? Verse 6, then Moshe said, this is the thing which Yahweh commanded you to do, and the glory of Yahweh will appear to you. I asked the question, not because I'm requesting an answer, but the question, who is the glory of Yahweh? Yehoshua. And Moshe said to Aaron, go to the altar, offer your sin offering and your burnt offering, and make atonement for yourself and for the people. Offer the offering of the people and make atonement for them as Yahweh commanded. You see the picture of the high priest is making atonement for the people? Who is our high priest? Yehoshua. Did he kind of make atonement for all the people? Aaron therefore went to the altar and killed the calf of the sin offering, which was for himself. Then the sons of Aaron brought the blood to him, and he dipped his finger in the blood, put it on the horns of the altar, and poured the blood at the base of the altar. But the fat, the kidneys, and the fatty lobe from the liver of the sin offering he burned on the altar as Yahweh had commanded Moshe. The flesh and the hide he burned with fire outside the camp. And he killed the burnt offering, and Aaron's sons presented to him the blood which he sprinkled all around on the altar. Then they presented the burnt offering to him with its pieces and head, and he burned them on the altar. And he washed the entrails and the legs, and burned with the burnt offering on the altar. Then he brought the people's offering, and took the goat, which was a sin offering for the people, and killed it, and offered it for sin like the first one. And he brought the burnt offering, and offered it according to the prescribed manner. Then he brought the grain offering, took a handful of it, and burned it on the altar, besides the burnt sacrifice of the morning. He also killed the bull and the ram, sacrifices of peace offerings, which were for the people, and Aaron's son presented the blood, which he sprinkled all around on the altar. And the fat from the bull and the ram, the fatty tail, what covers the entrails is implied, and the kidneys and the fatty lobe attached to the liver. They put the fat on the breast, then he burned the fat on the altar. But the breast, remember that's the brisket, and the right thigh Aaron waved as a wave offering before Yahweh as Moshe had commanded. I want to stop right there for just a minute. before we go on to 22. We're on the 8th day as this started out. They'd already gone through, they'd put the garments on them, they did the anointing, they'd built everything, and they're being what? Proscribed or consecrated into the priesthood. They have gone through a period of 7 days going through into the priesthood. Purification, right? If we look at all the different places that the 8th day is referenced for just a second, go to Leviticus 14 in verse 10. And on the 8th day he shall take 2 male lambs without blemish, 1 ewe lamb of the first year without blemish, 3/10 of fine flour mixed with oil as a grain offering, and 1 log of oil, approximately a pint. This is being done on the 8th day for what? Go back to verse 2. This shall be the law of the leper, for the day of his cleansing he shall be brought to the priest. So these are sacrifices then that are for cleansing or purification of the people. So there's a special process here for the cleansing of a leper. Go to Leviticus 15. In verse 14. Now in this chapter, and we're going to get there because most of it we've already been through that, you know, it's talking about the different kinds of discharges that people can have, you know, of any kind, you know. But in verse 14, on the 8th day he shall take for himself 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and come before Yahweh to the door of the tabernacle of meeting, and give them to the priest. So again, then these sacrifices are being offered for purification, even from waste discharges of some kind, or even including, you know, sexual discharges of some kind. But there has to be a purification. Go to Leviticus 22. In verse 27, he is giving us something here that's considering sacrifices in regard to the priesthood, what or when or how to do them and so forth. Notice here in verse 27, when a bull or a sheep or a goat is born, it shall be 7 days with its mother, and from the 8th day and thereafter it shall be accepted as an offering made by fire to Yahweh. So on the 8th day is when this would be acceptable. Circumcision was performed after the birth of a male child on what day? On the 8th day. Okay? Go to Leviticus 23. That's that one that somebody accused me of not knowing nothing else one time. But in verse 23, chapter 23 and verse 36, this is talking about the Feast of Sukkot, or Tabernacles. For 7 days you shall offer an offering made by fire to Yahweh. On the 8th day you shall have a holy convocation, and you shall offer an offering made by fire to Yahweh. It is a sacred Kadesh assembly, and you shall do no customary work on it. So the Feast of Tabernacles actually only lasts 7 days. So then the 8th day is what? And what is it called? Shmini Lev, the 8th day. And again, it's a picture of all things. So 8 has become associated with the time of new beginnings. The priesthood was brought out, the priesthood was started, the priesthood was set aside, and now Aaron and his sons have been, consecrated in the doorway of the tabernacle for 7 days, and now they're ready to enter into something new beginning on the 8th day. Yahweh has a plan according to Scripture that covers 7,000 years. We talked about it before, we looked in the Talmud and what it said about the 6,000 years, and the Messiah will be here in the 7th day, the 7,000 years, and he will reestablish everything in the 7th day on that 1,000 years. Remember in the book of Acts it says the Messiah is at the right hand of the Father right now until he comes back, which is the time of restoration of all things, even every word which proceeds from the mouth of Yahweh. So there's going to be a restoration of all things, and that's going to begin on the 8th day. That's why in Revelation when we see at the end of the 1,000 years, what do we see? The new Jerusalem coming down, the remade. Not a new creation, but a refreshed, a redo, a remake A purification. It's been purged and purified and cleansed. Revelation 22:14 says, who can enter this city? Those who do the commandments of Yahweh. I mean, everything points to the same thing. Go to Leviticus 25. In verse 22. Remember how we've got through? We've got the seventh day Sabbath. We've got growing and everything, you know, for 7 years, and then we, or 6 years, and then we rest on the seventh. Let the land rest on the Sabbath year. We got all these different pictures, and here in verse 22 it says, and you shall sow in the 8th year. You know, they're gonna harvest everything in the 6th year, and then they're going to have enough to last for 3 years because they're going to sow again. It's the same thing as you're going to harvest what you want on Friday, and you're going to have enough to eat on Saturday. And then you're going to start back up again on the 8th day again. You shall sow in the 8th year and eat the old produce until the 9th year. Until its produce comes in, you shall eat of the old. Again, we have, you know, everything starting over. He's giving us this same plan in a lot of different ways through a lot of different media, but he's giving us the same thing over and over and over again. I think that he thinks that one of these days we'll figure it out. We'll get it. So this is a year of sowing after the high Sabbath year. Then go to Numbers chapter 6. In verse 10. But as you read this, and when we get into it, you'll see that this is going to be a sanctification of someone who takes what's known as the Nazarite vows. Remember, Nazarite is different from Nazareth, which is not the same thing as Nazarene. But a Nazarite vow, and remember the word Nazarite means what? One who is unshorn. If you take a Nazarite vow, that means that you don't cut your hair for the whole period of time that you have a vow. And during that period of time, you don't eat from any of the fruit of the vine, right? Whether it's grapes or grape juice or raisins or anything else. If it came off the vine, you don't eat it. Think about that too. If that means you can't cut your hair, that must mean that they did regularly the other time. Okay. But in verse 10, this is on the Nazarite. Then on the 8th day he shall bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons to the priest to the door of the tabernacle of meeting. And the priest shall offer one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering, and make atonement for him, because he sinned by reason of the dead body, and he shall sanctify his head that same day. Somehow or other he was taking a Nazarite vow, and during a period of time, for however long it was, he touched a dead body, became unclean, and it wiped out his vows. Now he has to start over. We're trying to be clean. We're trying to be pure. Is it only dirt that he doesn't want on us? Okay. But is it the sin, the filth, the pollution in the world and everything that it represents, okay? And this is an idea. I don't know how many people realize way back when in history, you know, when the bubonic plague was going through Europe and killing everybody, the Jews were pretty much exempt, the Yehudi, the Hebrew people. Why? And it was because of the laws of the Torah that kept them clean, and they weren't affected, okay? And what did the common people begin to say? Well, since the Yehudi weren't having it, they must be the ones that caused it. So then they started killing them because they wasn't getting sick. I mean, the mind of people is, you know, but this attitude has never changed over the years. Let's go back to Leviticus then. I'm going to, just for a minute. We just came through the celebration of the Feast of Unleavened Bread and the Passover. And I'm asking you to kind of think about this for just a minute and kind of put it in perspective in a lot of ways. The Messiah's death as the Passover can also represent the ram of consecration that was, you know, used to consecrate Aaron and his sons into the priesthood. If we all consider ourselves part of the children of Israel, and Yahweh said he brought us out of Egypt in order for us to become a nation or a kingdom of priests, right? Then we would need to be consecrated into that priesthood, would we not? So the process of consecration in the priesthood that he went through with Aaron must be a picture of what he's going to go through with all of us. So Messiah's death on the Passover can also represent the ram of consecration into the priesthood. Since we're all called to be a nation of priests, Then the Passover is preparation, that was on preparation day, for entering into the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The Feast of Unleavened Bread then, and remember, unleavened bread, or leavened bread represents false doctrines, right? So unleavened bread means for that period of time, that period of 7, we're not supposed to have anything to do with any kind of false doctrines, correct? So it's the removal of false doctrines and sin. Now, false doctrine causes you to sin, and sin brings death, okay? So this 7 days of our consecration during the Feast of Unleavened Bread can represent our consecration into the priesthood that He called all of us to become. You celebrate the Passover, and you celebrate the Feast of Unleavened Bread without any kind of desire to be consecrated to Him or to walk in obedience to Torah, then you just went through all of that with an unclean thought or unclean ideas or in an unworthy manner. And in Corinthians it says anybody that does that unworthy manner can bring sickness, disease, and even death upon himself. Okay? So this is for entering in the service of Yahweh. Okay? I'm just wanting us to understand what we're reading here and what Aaron's gone through and how what we just went through and how it can be the same symbol, picture. Notice I'm not saying that this is the only interpretation you can put on it. There are a lot of ways that you can interpret things and a lot of ways that things can be applied. And because you apply it one way does not mean that that's the only interpretation. You see what I'm saying? So go back now again, look at verse 1. And notice who he called. It came to pass on the 8th day that Moshe called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. In this verse he called the elders to be there, but what did they do? All he did then was give instruction to Aaron, and then the instruction, the elders heard, and they're there as what? As witnesses. Yahweh has never done anything in the secret or in the dark. He always had witnesses to what He said. The elders are the witnesses of the instruction to Aaron and his sons. Go back over to Matthew 18. Everybody understands when I call New Testament actually commentary, I'm not trying to say that it's not inspired, but it is commentary on the Messiah and when He came to fulfill that which was prophesied. And this is a commentary over that fulfillment. But in Matthew 18, in verse 16. Now in this passage, the Messiah is talking, and he's talking about brother and so forth, brothers sinning against one another, and I'm not talking about that. But in verse 16, but if he will not hear you, take with you 1 or 2 more, that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. Notice what he's saying. Yahweh is telling us, when you want something to be established, you take 2 or 3 people with you, and then everybody hears the word, and then you have the mouth of what? More than 1 or 2 or 3 to establish the word, right? He's going to do the same thing He's telling us to do, right? Because we're supposed to walk in obedience to Him, and Messiah Yehoshua did the same thing. And He, if is the Word made flesh, then all this is Him. And this is out of the mouth of the Messiah. So out of 2 or 3, the words will be established. Go to Hebrews chapter 10. In verse 28, this is a very thought-provoking verse right here in Hebrews 10:28. Notice the text, not text, but the tense, present tense, future, in the past, Anyone who has rejected Moshe's law dies without mercy on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. In the book of Hebrews, many years after the death, burial, and resurrection of the Messiah, right? And yet he's still saying that if somebody rejects the instruction, the Torah, the law coming from Moses, and it's been verified by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, what happens to that person? He dies. If that's contemporary, you realize one of the reasons today that most people don't believe the law still for today is because the last time they broke Torah, they said, I didn't die. Now they begin to understand, Yahweh knows who's going to accept Him and who's not. Maybe He knows who's going to accept Him and when, whether we know it or not. But the minute a person rejects Him and says, that's it, no more, He's got no use for you. Stop and think about it. Just Go to Hebrews 12 in verse 1. Everybody likes to talk about Hebrews chapter 11 as being the faith chapter, and talk about all those people who bear witness, and all those people, you know, who testify, and all those people, you know, who show evidence and testimony and so forth. But here in chapter 12 verse 1 he says, therefore, you see, therefore is going back to all them things was listed in chapter 11, and he got to end, he said, therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. If the truth is being witnessed by, shall we say, the Torah and the prophets, that's out of the mouth of one or two or three, isn't it? So if the truth is being witnessed, then how can we say, oh, it's done away with? Where is the witness that establishes a rule out of the mouth of two or three that all that law is done away with? Messiah didn't say it when he was here. So who said it? And if Yahweh himself didn't say it, then it can't be true. Okay? Go to Luke 24. Starting in verse 35. Now, in this particular passage of Luke, Messiah, you know, has resurrected, and he joins with the disciples that are walking on the road to Emmaus, you know. And here in verse 35, it said, they told about the things on the road and how he was known to them in the breaking of bread. Now, as they said these things, Yehoshua himself stood in the midst of them and said to them, what do you think he said? Shalom Aleichem. Peace be upon you, or peace to you. Verse 37, but they were terrified and frightened and supposed they'd seen a spirit. I mean, they're walking down the road and he ain't there, and all of a sudden he's there. Kind of made them get a little bit excited, don't you think? And he said to them, why are you troubled, and why do doubts arise in your hearts? I think he's in the upper room with them now, right? Is where he is. He had been not on the road. He's in the upper room now, and he was talking about it. And he said to them, why are you troubled, and why do doubts arise in your hearts? Behold my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Handle me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see I have. When he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet, but while they still did not believe for joy and marveled, he said to them, have you any food here? I wonder what the purpose was of eating the food. They're going to eat and share together. He's going to share. He's going to reveal something to them. So they gave him a piece of broiled fish and some honeycomb, and he took and ate in their presence. Then he said to them, these are the words which I spoke to you while I was still with you, that all things must be fulfilled which were written in the Torah of Moshe and the prophets and the Psalms concerning me. See, that's what he said back in Matthew 5:17. Don't even think I came to abolish the law of the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. Fulfill what? Those things which were prophesied of him. He tells us here. Verse 45, and he opened their understanding that they might comprehend the Scriptures. When we turn to Messiah, when we look to Messiah, when we see him, then our understanding is being opened. We're beginning to understand, right? When you get the understanding and all of a sudden you still reject and say, I don't want a part of it, what happens? It don't have any more use for you. Then he said to them in verse 46, thus it is written, and thus it was necessary for the Mashiach to suffer and to rise from the dead the third day. He's saying that is written. And that repentance and remission of sins should be preached in his name to all nations, beginning at Jerusalem. And you are witnesses of these things. How many people did he appear to after his resurrection? To the disciples? About 500 in other places, you know. Chosen one. People who can be relied on. How many witnesses do we have then of the death, burial, and resurrection of Messiah in the gospel? 3 or 4, right? Well, then, out according to Jewish, tradition today, unless you got 3 witnesses, it can't be true. They don't even believe their own word, because we got it: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's 4. And then Paul talks about it. So how many witnesses have we got then? Do you realize in a court of law, if you had that many witnesses, boy, it'd be established without a shadow of a doubt. But they don't do it today. Go to Acts chapter 1. In verse 8. Now he's out there with them, and they're going over to the Mount of Olives. And then in verse 8, Messiah speaking, he said, well, let's back up just a little bit in verse 6, because most people don't even understand what that question means. Therefore, when they had come together, they asked him, saying, Master, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? Oh my, you mean they were expecting the kingdom of Israel to be restored? They got the kingdom of Judah, but they're looking for the kingdom of Israel? I wonder where Israel is. Because after all, that's who he said he came for. Verse 7, he said to them, it is not for you to know times or seasons which the Father has put in his own authority. Now, a lot of people use that verse today to say, oh, well, see, we're not supposed to know. That's not true. When he rode into Jerusalem on the donkey, remember? And he stopped outside the city and he wept over the people, and he says, you condemn yourself because you knew not the day of your visitation. He expected them to know when he was coming the first time. But it wasn't for them to know the second time. But it is for us. If he expected them to know when he came the first time, wouldn't he expect us to know when he's coming the second time? Verse 8, but you shall receive power when the Holy Spirit, the set-apart breath, the Word, has come upon you, and you shall be witnesses, or you shall give testimony to me in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria to the end of the earth. They're supposed to be witnesses of him, not to him. Organized religion today has got all these ideas and thoughts and everything, and everybody's trying to give their testimony, and everybody wants to stand up and give their testimony, and churches are built on these testimonies and everything, and yet nobody ever thinks about the testimony that Messiah said. What did he say? He said, don't even think I came to abolish the Torah. Okay? So where is the true testimony of Yehoshua? Where is the true testimony of Yehoshua not only being spoken, but being lived? Is the Torah something we talk about or do? Both, in it. Got to talk about it so you can learn it, so you can do it, right? If you know what it says do and you don't do it, then what are you doing? You're breaking Torah. What's that called? Sin. Transgression of the Torah, right? Messiah came to die for all the places where we've transgressed the Torah, where all we've sinned, right? Did that give us a license to continue to break Torah, continue to sin? Of course not. Go to Acts chapter 5. Well, I won't get that. We'll start in verse 29. Then Peter and the apostles answered and said, we ought to obey Yahweh rather than men. Oh my goodness. I mean, this is Acts. This is New Testament commentary. But he said we're supposed to obey Yahweh rather than men. Then in verse 30, the Elohi of our fathers raised up Yehoshua, whom you murdered by hanging on a tree. Him Yahweh exalted, his right hand, chief and deliverer to give repentance to Israel and forgiveness of sin. I know in a lot of translations they use the word Savior and all this kind of stuff, but the Greek word there is the number 4990. It's the Greek word soter. And the Greek word soter means deliverer. 4990. And then in verse 32 he says, and we are his witnesses. Who? The apostles are his witnesses. Those were the 12 that were chosen to become witnesses.
11.
And we are witnesses. No, even Judas was chosen. And remember, back up a little bit, and they had taken and picked Mattathias to take the place of Judas, so there were still 12. And we are his witnesses to these things, and so also is the Holy Spirit, the set-apart breath, the Word, whom Yahweh has given to those who obey him. You mean the set-apart Word comes to those who obey him? So the witness then and the Spirit, the breath, has got to be the same thing, because the Word witnesses of everything Messiah is going to do. The Spirit comes to teach the people to witness. And what does it teach the people to do? Go back and look see what the Word says. And he said, test all the spirits, test all the breaths, test the words that you hear. If the words that you hear from something or somebody or something else don't match what the Word says, then where's it from? Not from Him. If He's given us His Word to test everything by, are we left out in the cold? No, the Torah then becomes what? The anchor for our soul. And that's the Torah. And that's never changed. I don't care how many people try to change it, it has never changed. You know, the Antichrist, the false Christ, the false Messiah, he's going to try to change times and seasons and all that kind of stuff. Who tried to do all that? Our Greco-Roman society, which is based on something else. All right, go back to verse 2 of Leviticus 9. Notice he'll sing there, and he said there, and take for yourself. Well, he gives them all these things that they're supposed to do and offer all these sacrifices. And he said, after you've done this, then Yahweh will appear to them, right? Down in verse 7, these are, it's a sin offering and a burnt offering for our own and for the people. In verse 8, the calf for our own, and the word there, the number is 5695. It's the same as the word up in verse 2, and it means a steer or a bull calf. Verse 12 is a ram. For the burnt offering. In verse 15 then, the goat was a male as a sin offering for the people. In verse 16, a burnt offering, a calf, a male, a lamb. And then in verse 21, the breast, the brisket, and the right thigh, the hind quarter, as a wave offering before Yahweh as Moses commanded. And the word wave is the number 8573. The word itself is the Hebrew word tenufah, like Tenoofw, tenufah. And the word itself means a present as offered up in sacrifice or tribute. It's a contribution, it's any offering, it's anything that's lifted up and waved up to Him as an offering to Him. You notice the people were given the best of everything, and it was called a wave offering, so the best of everything offered up to Him is what He gave back to the people. When He led them out in the wilderness, all the gold and the silver and the purple and all the stuff that the people had gathered up from the people of Egypt, He went back and He said, you give me an offering. But before He asked for an offering, He'd already given them what? Everything. You receive a blessing before you can bless somebody else. Right? If somebody tells you, oh, you got to, if you ain't got it, just give me a pledge, you just give me a vow or something, and Yahweh bless you later. No, that's a crock. Yahweh gave it to you beforehand, and if you want to bless somebody out of that afterwards, then you can do so. But don't go out there thinking, oh, I got to make a vow, or I got to do this, or I got to do that, or if you'll give me a vow of $10,000, I'll send you a clean handkerchief, or whatever. That's not the way it works. The word heave is not in that verse, but we hear the word wave and we hear the word heave, and the number for heave is 8641. It's terumah as opposed to tenufah, and the heave offering is a present as offered up in sacrifice or a tribute. So anything can be, a heave offering. You wave something. A heave offering is that which has been waved. Okay? We're talking about the same thing. Now, all these things that we've looked at, the offering of the sacrifices, okay? First one was the sin offering, right? The second was the burnt offering. The third one was the meal offering, or the food offering. The fourth is the peace offering. The sin offering, and I'm thinking about this can be a way of applying these things. The sin offering can be a signification of purification, right? The burnt offering is a self-surrender to Yahweh. The burnt sacrifice, they're totally burned up for Yahweh's right. Did not Messiah Yahushua offer Himself totally to be consumed up to Yahweh? Then the meal or food offering is a consecration of our obedience to His service. And then the peace offering symbolizes fellowship with Yahweh. When you go into the holy place in the tabernacle, what was in there? The table with the showbread, and it had 12 loaves representing 12 tribes. It had the menorah, the light, representing Messiah and his sacrifice, and all of mankind being supported by the sacrifice. And it had the altar of incense for the prayers, right? This is a place of fellowship. The only light that's in that room is from the light of the menorah, right? So all the fellowship, all the work had to be done in the light of Messiah Yehoshua. Nothing else, according to his word. Now, we today, think about Messiah, have had eternal life restored. When Adam sinned, what was lost? Eternal life. What entered the world? Sin and death. Every man that's ever been born since that time has been born under the original sin. The original sin was what? Adam disobeyed Yahweh. And it's funny too, the original sin, the disobedience, had to do with something he ate. Yeah, kind of a neat thought. They ate from that fruit of that tree, whether the apple or pomegranate or what it was, it doesn't really matter. Go to Matthew 25. In verse 46, you see, Messiah came, and through his death, burial, and resurrection, we have received eternal life, but to those whom he gives it to. Now, if he says to somebody, depart from me, I never knew you, evidently he's not imparting eternal life to that person, is he? But here, and we've all read the parable and everything here, but in verse 46 he said, and these will go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. What's the definition of righteous? Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 24. Then those who obey the Torah will be considered righteousness for them. And then in Romans it said, the obedience of the Torah, which is a righteousness, teaches you of the righteousness of the Messiah, which is apart from the Torah. So there's a righteousness and obedience, and then a righteousness that's imputed to us through Messiah Yehoshua. One witnesses, and one becomes. But it's the same, we have righteousness. And here in Matthew, he's talking about eternal life. When we offer ourselves to him as a whole burnt offering, which is what Messiah did he not? Now, before he left, he said, where I go, you know, and the way, you know. The way he went was what? Through total self-sacrifice to Yahweh. Are we supposed to walk in his footsteps? How can you walk in the footsteps of Messiah and not do what he did? Now, he's told us that we must eat his flesh. Didn't he say that? Is he trying to get us to become cannibals? Or does he want us to understand that the word is his flesh and we eat this word? Well, you know the old saying, you become what you eat? We eat this word and then we can become in the image of his son, right? That's what we're told. So we offer ourselves as a whole burnt offering to his will. Go to Hebrews 10. Well, I was there a while ago. There it is. In Hebrews chapter 10, the writer of Hebrews says, starting in verse 8, 9, and 10, previously saying sacrifice and offering, burnt offerings and offerings for sin, you did not desire nor had pleasure in them which are offered according to the law. Why didn't he have pleasure in those things? Those things were there as a substitutionary atonement for sin. And something innocent in the animal was given to cover their sin. So he didn't have pleasure. What did he really want? He wanted people to obey. The sacrifices were just there to preserve life until Messiah should come. Verse 9, then he said, behold, I have come to do your will, Yahweh. He takes away the first that he may establish the second. What was the first? Animal sacrifice. He took that away to establish the second, which was what? Himself. Verse 10, by that will we have been sanctified or set apart through the offering of the body of Yehoshua Mashiach once for all. He plainly tells us. Now, every time the Catholic Church performs a Mass, what do? They kill Messiah. If you do Mass 3 times a day, you kill Messiah 3 times a day. I mean, stop and think about, what they say and what the Scriptures actually says. Once for all. You're not supposed to do it for one. When we do a memorial celebration, Passover right now, what are we remembering? his sacrifice once for all. If we think that that's nothing, and we trample the blood of Messiah underfoot, and we follow our own traditions, and all of a sudden we create something new, and we lift that up, we've forgotten all about totally the sacrifice of Messiah, have we not? And isn't that the same thing as counting the blood of Messiah as nothing? That has been replaced then with man's traditions. Go to Romans 6. Verse 10. Excuse me. Verse 4. It said, therefore, we were buried with him through baptism into death. You see, the baptism, a total immersion in water, is supposed to represent us being buried a total in the ground with him. So if we have been buried with him through baptism into death, see, that's the symbol, that just as Mashiach was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we also should walk in newness of life. If we were buried, representing we died for our sins, which were transgression of the Torah, we were buried then in baptism like he was buried for our sins, then we are raised up to commit the same sins again? No. To a new life, to walk in obedience to the Torah, because that's what we didn't do before. What are we supposed to be doing today? Walking in obedience to that same Torah. Because what Messiah did once, he did for all, and for all time. We consecrate our daily life, day by day by day. I know that world out there and the people we work for and the jobs we have and all the people we deal with think that we're just out there to serve them. And I know that they think that, right? But who are we trying to serve? We're trying to serve Yehoshua, Yahweh, right? And be a witness of him. Our witness has to be the way we live. You can say one thing, live another, and your witness is destroyed because you lived and did something different, right? So what you do has to match what you say. If what you do don't match what you say, what does that make you? What's that word about the voice out from under the mask? Called a hypocrite? So we consecrate our daily life to his Torah to walk in obedience, right? Go to Ephesians 5. In verse 8. In verse 8 of Ephesians 5. For you were once darkness, but now light in Yehoshua. Walk as sons of light. Walk as sons of light. See, Aaron was a light bringer, and we were reading about Aaron and his son. We're reading about Aaron and his son being consecrated into the priesthood. Isn't that what we're reading? Y'all thought I wasn't going to be able to connect all this up, did you? For you were once darkness, but now light in Yehoshua. Walk as the sons of light. 1 Corinthians 1. In chapter 1. Now, we've gone through the obedience, the consecration, everything, and now we begin to have fellowship with Yahweh because of the peace, because he was our peace offering, the peace we have received through Yehoshua as our high priest, right? So in 1 Corinthians 1 in verse 9, he says, El, you know, most Bibles have God, but El is faithful, by whom you were called into the fellowship of his Son, Yehoshua, the Mashiach, our Rabboni, our teacher. We were called by what? El is faithful, by whom we were called. So it's actually El, the Father, calling us, right? The Word is calling us as the Father. The Word became flesh, became the Son. And he's calling us into fellowship of his Son. Now, fellowship means what? Partnership, not socializing. Paul said that they had given him and offered him the right hand of fellowship. That's like we shake hands and agree and we're partners in something, okay? Fellowship means partnership. Fellowship doesn't mean going out on, Saturdays and going bowling and everybody having fun together. That's socializing. That's not partnership. There's a big difference between those two. So again, we fellowship with him, and as our high priest, he intercedes for us as what? As we confess and repent, right? In 1 John he tells us that whoever confesses their sin, he's faithful to forgive, right? So we confess our sin and repent. What is sin? Still transgression of the law. Now go to Hebrews chapter 2. In Hebrews chapter 2, in verse 17, now this is still talking about Messiah Yehoshua, and he says, therefore in all things he had to be made like his brethren. In all things he had to be made like us. Well, he'd never sinned, had he? But we had. So he had to be made to sin in order to continue to be like us, in order to what? Condemn sin in the flesh, which he came in. He had to be made like his brethren, that he might be a merciful and faithful high priest in things to Yahweh, or to Elohim, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. So he is a high priest. We have to go back now, and if nobody ever really studied to learn what the duties of the high priest were, then they have no idea what the duties of Yehoshua are as our high priest. It's through we learn about the high priest and what their duties are, and then we learn what Messiah is supposed to do, right? So the duties of the high priest when it comes to sin. And in verse 18 there in Hebrews 2, it says, for in that he himself has suffered being tested, he is able to aid those who are tested. Remember, the only test that's ever going to be put to you in your life, and Satan's going to throw all kinds of things at you in the world and all that kind of stuff, but the only test that's ever going to come as far as Yahweh is concerned is what? Will you obey the Torah? That's the only test you're going to have. Will you keep his law? It's not, well, I choose number 1 or number 4, and it doesn't matter what color the doors are. Doesn't matter all these things that the world tries to give you. The choice is whether or not you will obey Yahweh or not. That's it. And that's the only test. How long will you disobey what Yahweh says? Because as long as you continue to break his word, you're disobeying him. Okay. Go back to Exodus. I know, but I'm going to Exodus. We were in Exodus a few weeks ago, so I'm going back there. Okay, in Exodus chapter 30, Exodus chapter 28. I wasn't really planning on talking about this right now, but it just seemed to, my goodness. In Exodus 28, in verses 37 and 36, 37, 38. This is where they were making all the clothes and the ornamentation and everything, that Aaron was going to wear, and the priests and all this stuff. And in verse 36, he's talking about make a plate. The word plate is the word zith, kind of like the zit, but this is singular, zith. Number is 6731. And this is a plate of pure gold and engraved on it like the engraving of a signet. Now what are the words engraved on it? Kadosh LeYahweh. Set apart or holy to Yahweh. Now those are the words that are engraved on this gold plate, which is hanging down on the forehead of Aaron and is attached by 2 blue threads to the white turban that he wears. Kind of like the helmet of salvation, and it means that you're set apart to Yahweh. Okay. In verse 37, And you shall put it on a blue cord, that it may be on the turban. It shall be on the front of the turban. So it shall be on Aaron's forehead, that Aaron may bear the iniquity of the holy things, but the children of Israel hallow in all their holy gifts. The high priest then is going to bear the iniquity. Iniquity is referring to the sin. The people would bring the animal, they lay their hands on the animal, and symbolically the sin was transferred to the animal, then the animal was offered up as sacrifice, and who carried the iniquity of the people? The high priest. Is that not a picture of Messiah Yehoshua? Did he not come to take what? Our iniquity on him? The minute he did that, and that offering was accepted, then what happens to us? We reconcile back to the Father. Does that mean that we have become Chadosh LaYahweh? Set apart to Yahweh? So the whole purpose of the high priest then was to get you set apart back to the Father. What Messiah came to do. What separates us from the Father? How can you keep doing that if you've been restored back to Him? You can't keep doing the things that pulls you away and then go back the next week and say, oh, I didn't mean to, but I won't do it. We don't even understand what repentance is. What is repent? Turn back in obedience to the Torah. If you're not turning back, walking in obedience to the Torah, you never have repented. You may have played the word game, but you haven't done it. Verse 36 again, so it shall be on Aaron's forehead, that Aaron may bear the iniquity of the holy things, the sacrifices, they had the sin transferred to them, then he bore those sins, which the children of Israel hallow in all their set apart or sacred gifts, and it shall always be on his forehead, that they may be accepted before Yahweh. The high priest then is always before the Father. Every time you come to the high priest, Messiah Yehoshua, confess your sin in his name, he's faithful to forgive. Why? Because he's the high priest. He is consecrated and set apart to Yahweh, and his death was to restore us back to the Father. And what does it tell us in Romans? The Father was in him, or in Corinthians, restoring, reconciling the world back to himself. If he came to do that, and if we want to continue sinning, then what are we doing? Taking ourselves out away from him. He said nobody else can yank you out of his hand, but you can. All you got to do is just disobey what he said. And you're gone. It's really simple. Go back to Leviticus, verse 22. We're at a part here in studying the Torah where the consecration into the priesthood has been for Aaron and his son, the light bringer and the sons of light. And if we apply ourselves to Messiah Yehoshua, who's the true light, and us being sons and daughters of light, not of the darkness, we just went through a time frame, of the Feast of Unleavened Bread and so forth, for preparation and preparing ourselves, be set apart for him, set apart, right? Then in verse 22, then Aaron lifted his hand toward the people. Now wait a minute, he and all the sons, they went through and they're doing everything so that they can minister to the people, right? So then Aaron lifted his hand toward the people, blessed them, and came down from offering the sin offering, the burnt offering, and the peace offering. After all these things were done, he lifted his hands and blessed the people, right? Go to Luke 24. In Luke 24, we read verse 44 a while ago, where he said all these things that he's done, concerning the Torah and the Psalms and everything concerning him. He had just gone through performing all the burnt offerings, sacrifice for sin, peace offerings. He had done all these things, right? He's now fixing to enter up into his priesthood, is he not? And as he enters into his priesthood, what does he come to the people and say, which is what Aaron did when he said, and he says here in verse 49 of Luke 24, "Behold, I send the promise of my Father upon you." What was the promise of the Father? That he's going to send the Spirit, the Word, to indwell us. "But tarry in the city of Jerusalem until you are endued with power from on high." See, that completed Word hadn't been shed abroad in their hearts yet, because, he had to be fulfilled. In verse 50, he led them out as far as Bethany, and he lifted up his hands and blessed them. He did the same thing that Aaron did after his consecration into the priesthood. He blessed them. Verse 51, now it came to pass while he blessed them that he was parted from them and carried up into heaven. And they worshipped him and returned to Jerusalem with great joy, and were continually in the temple, praising and blessing Yahweh. Can everybody say, Amen? Amen. Go back to Leviticus there. Verse 23 and 24, and Moses and Aaron. Now this is after the blessing. And Moshe and Aaron went into the tabernacle of meeting and came out and blessed the people. Then the glory of Yahweh appeared to all the people. You remember when Messiah was standing up in the room with the disciples and he said something about, or they came to him and asked him a question, and he said, how come you're going to manifest yourself to us but not to the rest of the world? Remember when they asked him that? He only reveals himself to those who obey him. The understanding of why you do what you do comes from the doing of what it said do. How are you ever going to understand the celebration of the Sabbath if you never celebrate the Sabbath? How are you going to understand the meaning of the words if you never read them? How are you going to understand the meaning of the acts you do if you don't do it? What did I think it was David, but what if it was whoever, somebody else? What if they went in Psalm 119? When he said, I have more understanding than all my teachers and elders. Why? Because I do what your word says do. So the understanding comes with the doing. Wisdom. And all your wisdom get understanding. And where does understanding come from? The doing of what the word says. Then you begin to see the need for it. Moshe and Aaron went into the tabernacle meeting and came out and blessed the people. Then the glory of Yahweh appeared to all the people. Moses and Aaron were there to bless. The blessing that was set upon the people, did Moses write it down in the book? The Hebrew priest, and so forth, for all these years, without really knowing why or what or anything, but don't they still continue to use the blessing of Aaron? We just heard it when we started the thing out. May he lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. If you got a blessing but you ain't got no peace to enjoy it, what good is it? So with peace comes the blessing. And the peace that surpasses all understanding is what? You have the Torah, and you know if I'm walking in obedience to this Torah, then Yehoshua, who became flesh, with the Word made flesh, had brought peace to me, right? And then I can enjoy the blessing that I have. And what is that blessing that I have? You can enjoy this life, and in the ages to come, eternal life. And it comes from obedience to the Torah. There's no other way. You can go around and around and around that bush all you want to, but it's never going to change. Remember, the voice is in the bush. Verse 24. After all this took place, what did it say? And fire came out from before Yahweh and consumed the burnt offering and the fat on the altar. When all the people saw, they shouted and fell on their faces. That's worship, isn't it? You fall down before Yahweh, you prostrate yourself, you offer your whole body, soul, you offer your life to Him. If you're not walking in obedience to Him, who have you offered your life to? I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but folks, you've got to understand, we're in a time frame, we ain't got time to play games. It's getting close to the end. What we do or don't do doesn't affect just us, it affects a whole lot of people. Parents, friends, people we know, children. What we do or don't do affects what happens to them. Chapter 10. But wouldn't that be a powerful sign when fire came out from the... I'm saying, here's this altar, they laid all this stuff on. He never told them to build a fire. He just told them to put it up there. And then all of a sudden fire comes out and what? What did Abraham do when he cut the animals in half and laid them on top of that mountaintop and the blood spilled out? Then he put him to sleep, right? And then who walked in the blood? A flaming torch. The fire of Yahweh. Who is that? Yehoshua, the one that walked in the blood. Chapter 10. Oh, this is really something. After all the things that they've just seen. And remember, we're reading about it. These people were 2 million strong standing out there in the wilderness seeing it. Then Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, each took his censer and put fire in it, put incense on it, and offered profane fire before Yahweh, which he had not commanded them. The name Nadab is 5070, the number. The name itself means liberal or generous. Well, can you apply that to politics? Okay. The other son is Abihu. If you write that, like Avi, or I think most people write A-B, Avi, which means Av, meaning the father. You put the letter I in there, which is like E, so Avi means me, or mine. Who. And who in Hebrew means what? He. Who is he? So Abihu means he is my father, is what this name means.
What's the number?
Number 30. In strong. Nadab is 5070. And in Abihu, number 30, he is my father, meaning Elohim. The word profane there is the number 2114. The Hebrew word is the word zur, if you pronounce it, not sewer, zur with a Z-O-O-R, zur. The word itself means to be a foreigner. It also means to be strange. It also means to commit adultery. So evidently what this was then, this strange fire was adulterated fire. You see, later on we're told that when you go to offer the incense, you have to get the coals of fire where? Off the altar where the burnt offering was. You put those coals in the censer, and then you put the incense on those, right?
Only the high priest.
But if you went and got the coals from somewhere else, if you went and got the fire from something or someplace else, even if you used the right incense, the fire was wrong, right? But notice it says, they offered profane fire before Yahweh, which he had not commanded them. It didn't say anything about the incense or anything else being wrong. It said the fire was profane or adulterated. So where did it come from? Remember in Numbers, we got the guy who's out gathering up sticks. He's going to make a fire to make a burnt offering. Burn off somebody else. Maybe this was an offering of somebody else that they brought this fire. I'm asking a question. I don't know, but I'm just saying we have to understand that in this passage, the fire is something he didn't command them to do.
They weren't the high priest either.
I understand that, okay, but we haven't gotten into all the duties of the high priest yet. So right now, that doesn't really have a bearing on what's taking place. These two men decided to bring something themselves. Verse 2, so fire went out from Yahweh and devoured them, and they died before Yahweh. Now these had just gone through the whole thing of being presented, consecrated, set apart, all the blessings, everything, right? And then they sinned, and what happened? They died. When he brought the people out of Egypt, right? And all of them that went in under the blood, including the mixed multitude that went in under the blood with them, and they brought them out in the wilderness, what happened to them? They died in the wilderness. All those that were numbered, right? How many of those that were numbered actually went into the promised land? 2. Yeah, all those that were numbered. Verse 3, then Moshe said to Aaron, this is what Yahweh spoke, saying. Now he's explaining what these 2 boys are dying from and why. By those who come near me, I must be regarded as holy or set apart. And before all the people, I must be glorified. If somebody is doing something that's not glorifying to Yahweh, and in a time when it should be, then they're really not bringing glory to Him, right? And they're bringing death on their head. The sentence is there. So Aaron held his peace. Now go back to Exodus 19 there. In verse 22. It said, let the priests who come near Yahweh sanctify or set apart themselves, lest Yahweh break out against them. They have to be sanctified. They have to be set apart. Everything has to be done according to Yahweh, set apart to Him. When they brought something that was profaned or adulterated, or somebody else, they brought something from someplace else and mixed it with the things of him, right? And yet that's exactly what he said don't do, and yet they did, and they died. Does he mean what he says? But you know, most people don't think he does. It doesn't matter. After all, the last time I broke the law, I didn't die, so it ain't going to matter in the future. Don't mistake the patience of Yahweh for thinking that he doesn't mean what he says. Okay? Go to 2 Chronicles. In 2 Chronicles, in chapter 26, verse 11. In verse 11 of 2 Chronicles 26, it says, Moreover, Uzziah had an army of fighting men who went out to war by companies according to the number on their roll, as prepared by Yael, the scribe, and Maaseiah, the officer under the hand of Hananiah, of the king's captains. The total number of chief officers of the mighty men of valor was 2,600. These all under King Uzziah. And under their hand was an army of 307,500 that made war with mighty power to help the king against the enemy. Then Uzziah prepared for them, for the entire army, shields, spears, helmets, body armor, bows, and slings. Stone slingers is what that was. And he made devices in Jerusalem invented by skillful men to be on the towers and the corners to shoot arrows and large stones. So his fame spread far and wide, for he was marvelously helped till he became strong. When you get strong enough to think, well, I can do it on my own now, I don't need nothing from nobody, right? I'm all I need. Verse 16, but when he was strong, his heart was lifted up to his destruction, for he transgressed against Yahweh, his Elohim, his Creator, by entering the temple of Yahweh to burn incense on the altar of incense. You see, we have a connection here between the two sons of Aaron, you know. So Azariah, the priest, went in after him, and with him were 80 priests of Yahweh, valiant men. And they withstood King Uzziah and said to him, It is not for you, Uzziah, to burn incense to Yahweh, but for the priests, the sons of Aaron, who are consecrated to burn incense. Get out of the sanctuary, for you have trespassed. You'll have no honor from Yahweh, Elohim. Then Uzziah became furious, and he had a censer in his hand to burn incense. He was prepared. He hadn't done it yet, but he was just prepared to do it. And while he was angry with the priest, leprosy broke out on his forehead before the priest in the house of Yahweh beside the incense altar. He became a leper. And Azariah, the chief priest, and all the priests looked at him, and there on his forehead he was leprous. So they thrust him out of that place. Indeed, he also hurried to get out because Yahweh had struck him. King Uzziah was a leper until the day of his death. He dwelt in an isolated house because he was a leper, for he was cut off from the house of Yahweh. Then Jotham, his son, was over the king's house, judging the people of the land. Does this kind of make sense? And it says Yahweh will not be mocked. I mean, people can, you know, they can think it's fun or funny or whatever they want to do, but the truth will out. Go to Galatians chapter 6. Verses 7 through 10. And Paul's writing here and he said, Do not be deceived. Elohim is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. You see, people get involved in doing all kinds of things and nothing happens to them, and they don't think that Yahweh is doing anything, and yet in reality what they're doing is creating what they're going to have and be and become. And they're doing it to themselves. What a man sows. Verse 8, For he who sows to his flesh will of the flesh reap corruption, but he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life. You see, if corruption comes in, then something is dead and it's going to rot and it's going away. it's not going to live forever. It's only that life which lives forever which is not going to be corrupted, right? Verse 9, and let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. So many people think, oh man, you know, I just keep on going, but nothing's happening. No, you just keep on going because you're laying a foundation. Verse 10, therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those who are of the household of faith or of trust. Go back to Leviticus. Again, we read there in verse 3, Moses said to Aaron, this is what Yahweh spoke, saying, by those who come near me, I must be regarded as holy, and before all the people, I must be glorified. Go to Numbers chapter 16. We read Exodus, but here in Numbers chapter 16, in verses 17 through 18. Remember in this particular passage, Korah had instigated a whole lot of people. There was about 250 people that all come together, you know, against Moses and Aaron and everything. And they were saying, y'all just set yourself up too high. We're just as good as you are, and all this kind of stuff. So in verse 17, Moses, you know, is speaking to him. And he says, each of you take his censer, put incense in it, and each of you bring his censer before Yahweh, 250 censers. You also and Aaron, each of you with his censer. Do they not remember what happened to them two guys that brought the censers with the incense on them before? Verse 18, so every man except Moses took his censer, put fire in it, laid incense on it, and stood at the door of the tabernacle of meeting with Moses and Aaron. we all know that, you know, the fire came and they were gone and everything, you know. But go over to Numbers 28. Excuse me, go back to number 16, go to verse 28. I didn't mean chapter 28. In verse 28 of number 16, then Moses said, by this you shall know that Yahweh has sent me to do all these works, for I have not done them of my own will. If these men die naturally like all men, or if they are visited by the common fate of all, then Yahweh has not sent me. He said, if nothing happens to these men, if they live on to die a regular life, then Yahweh didn't call me to do what he did. Verse 30, but if Yahweh creates a new thing, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, and they go down alive into the pit, then you will understand that these men have rejected Yahweh. They had no fear of Yahweh. That's a real problem in today's world. People have no fear of Yahweh. They have no fear of what he can do or can't do. Remember what Yahweh said in the New Testament, the commentary? He said, don't fear a man who can kill you. He said, the one you better fear is the one who, after he has killed you, can throw your soul into hell for all eternity. That's the one you better fear. But people don't have a fear. If they did, they would walk in obedience to him. But if they don't, then they don't. It's really simple. Go to 1 Peter chapter 1. In verse 13 through 16. Before we get down to verse 13, let's just take a quick notice here in verse 1 and see who Peter is writing to. Peter, an apostle of Yahushua Mashiach, to the pilgrims of the dispersion. The pilgrims of the dispersion, who's he writing to? The lost sheep of the house of Israel scattered in all the nations of the world. Who he's writing to? The lost sheep, the tribes. Elect according to the foreknowledge of Elohim the Father and sanctification of the Spirit for obedience, and sprinkling of the blood of Yahushua Mashiach, to the pilgrims of the dispersion, those who are scattered. And now down in verse 13 he says, therefore gird up the loins of your mind, be sober, and rest your hope fully upon the grace that is to be brought to you at the revelation or the revealing of Yahushua Mashiach. If people are not beginning to recognize who and what he is, then it really hadn't been being revealed to them. 14, as obedient children, not conforming yourselves to the former lust in your ignorance, but as he who called you is set apart, you also be set apart in all your conduct. In verse 16, because it is written, be holy, be set apart, for I am set apart. If he is, and we're not, then he's going to say, depart from me, I never knew you, you who practice lawlessness. I mean, that I don't think that's hard to understand. In Judaism as a religion teaches also that the greater a man's knowledge, the stricter is going to be his standard of judgment. Now, stop thinking about it. If you're really going to be judged more harsh because of all the things you know, and if you're not going to do nothing, you really might want to quit learning. You know? Because you're just making it harder. You see where it talks about sowing the seed? You keep on sowing the seed and you're building your own, whatever it is. We've all heard the story. You made your bed, you better lie in it. Right? Go to Luke 12. In verse 48. Messiah is speaking, and in my Bible it's in the red letters, which is implying that he's the one that's doing the talking. In verse 48 he said, but he who did not know, yet committed things worthy of stripes, shall be beaten with few. He who did not know. For everyone to whom much is given, from him much will be required, and to whom much has been committed, of him they will ask the more. The more you learn, the more is going to be expected of you. You know, I've always said this before, you know, people that come here, when you learn and you study, this is not, we're not trying to build a church, we're not trying to build something, we're trying to teach people how to study, how to learn, so that then you can go out and become ministers and instructors and teach others. That's the whole purpose. It'd be nice if we could, you know, everybody that ever come here can stay. Of course, we couldn't get them in the house. Right? But that's the whole purpose of what it is. Yeshiva Hanativ is a school, and you're supposed to learn how to go teach others. How many people are learning that? Go to James chapter 3. You know that book is called James. In the Hebrew, his name is Yaakov, same as Jacob. Yeah. And while we're doing this, let's just go back in James chapter 1 and see who he is writing to. Chapter 1, verse 1. Yaakov, a servant of Yahweh and of the Master Yehoshua Mashiach, to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. He's writing to the scattered tribes. Isn't it funny, all these people that write these books know who the lost sheep of the house of Israel are, right? But today, Messiah plainly said, I've come only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and everybody says we've replaced them. Isn't that, you know? Okay. In chapter 3 of Yaakov, in verse 1, he says, my brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment. Everybody has a tendency sometimes to want to teach somebody. Let me put that another way. Everybody is teaching somebody else something, either by what they say or what they do. So all of us have become teachers. The thing about it is, if we're learning the truth of Yahweh, but then we're actually teaching somebody some other way by what we do or what we say, what are we doing? We're bringing strict judgment on ourselves. That's going back, as you sow, so shall you reap. People don't want to believe it, but it happens. Go back to Leviticus in verse 4. We're going to... we got to keep moving, right? And Moshe called Mishael and Elzaphan, the sons of Uzziel, the uncle of Aaron, and said to them, come near, carry your brethren from before the sanctuary out of the camp. The two had just died fire came out, and now he's calling these other two, which were related to him. He said, come get your brother. So they went near and carried them by their tunics out of the camp, as Moshe had said. Remember, that was the white tunic, the white garments that they had been told to put on and wear. And now they're picking them up and they're carrying them by these garments and carrying them out of the camp. And Moses said to Aaron and to Eleazar and Ithamar his sons, do not uncover your heads nor tear your clothes. So Aaron and the other sons have still got on their garments and their head coverings. And he said, you don't tear them or take them off or nothing. Do not uncover your heads nor tear your clothes, lest you die and wrath come upon all the people. They have been consecrated to the service of Yahweh. There's no time, no room for them to be doing something else, because they are supposed to be a picture of the Messiah. But let your brethren, the whole house of Israel, bewail the burning which Yahweh has kindled. Consumed. He consumed them by that fire. He's saying, you're not going to go weep for these two, because you've been consecrated to do a particular job. You're now in the service of Yahweh. You let the rest of the house of Israel wail and bemoan and cry, but you have been consecrated. Don't you know that had to be a tough situation for him? He just had two sons die in a fire. He watched them. Somebody's son, somebody's daughter, somebody's brother, somebody's sister, somebody's mother, somebody's father, somebody's something is going to wind up in a lake of fire, and others are going to see it and know it. Not going to be easy. Especially if you can think back and realize at what point in time you were the one that caused them to be there. Think about that. Now in verse 7 he says, you shall not go out from the door of the tabernacle of meeting lest you die, for the anointing oil of Yahweh is upon you. And they did according to the word of Moshe. Then Yahweh spoke to Aaron, saying, do not drink wine or intoxicating drink, you nor your sons with you, when you go into the tabernacle of meeting, lest you die. It's a statute forever throughout your generations. In verse 4, the name Mishael, number 4332, and his name means who is what El is. Okay? Who is what El is? Elzaphon, the other one, Numbers 469. It means my El has protected. And again in verse 5, the word tunics or coats is the number 3801. It's the Hebrew word ketaret or ketanet. It's the linen garments that were made for them to wear. Remember Revelation, it says what? The white linen garments are the righteous acts of the saints. So the white linen represents the righteous acts we're covered in. Now in this whole thing, Aaron has been consecrated as a high priest. His 4 sons were consecrated as priests also. And he's saying all the other people can weep and moan, but you cannot. Now the other two, in Eleazar and Ithamar. And Eleazar, number 499, means El is helper, or my helper. And Ithamar, the number is 385, and it means the coast of palms. That sounds kind of strange until you recognize that the word translated palm means because of its being erect or upright. Remember the blind man that Messiah healed, and he asked him what he saw, and he said, I see men like trees walking. He's talking about those walking who are walking upright. That's what it's all talking about. Now this injunction here against drinking in verses 8 and 9 during the performance of their duties, rabbinical priesthood today will tell you that the fire came out from Moses and destroyed these 2 men because they were drunk. They'd been drinking. They will tell you that because this verse is so close to that last verse, and they say, well, that must have been the reason why he burned them up. But what did it tell us? Because they brought profane fire. But now in conjunction with that, he gives us another injunction here. Do not drink wine or intoxicating drink, you nor your sons with you, when you go in the tabernacle meeting, lest you die. It's a statute forever throughout your generation. Now why is he telling them not to drink when they go in there to do this thing? Verse 10. that you may distinguish between holy, or the set apart, and those things which are not set apart, and between the clean and the unclean. You need to have a clear head, be thinking clearly on what is right and what is wrong when you are ministering the things of Yahweh. Isn't that what it's about? Verse 11, and that you may teach the children of Israel all the statutes which Yahweh has spoken to them by the hand of Moshe. Aaron and his sons are going to be teaching all the statutes that were communicated from Yahweh to Moses, and he wrote them down. Go to Proverbs chapter 20. In verse 1. As you read the Proverbs, and you think most of these Proverbs are written by Solomon, if not, they'll give you somebody else's name. But the person writing the Proverbs has learned a truth here, and they're giving them to us in the form of what we think of Proverbs. Verse 1, he says, wine is a mocker, intoxicating drink arouses brawling, and whoever is led astray by it is not wise. Isn't that neat? Go over to Proverbs 31. We're not going to get down into verse 10 and on in, but we're just going to, in verse 4 and 5 of Proverbs chapter 31. I don't know whether yours don't. Most Bibles have a little editorial note in there that says this is wisdom for leaders, those who are supposed to be trying to lead somebody else. Verse 4, it's not for kings, Lemuel, it's not for the kings to drink wine, nor for princes intoxicating drink, lest they drink and forget the Torah and pervert the justice of all, literally in Hebrew, the sons of affliction. Liquor, wine, alcohol does something in the brain, does it not? People may think it doesn't, but it does. No matter what they like to think, it does. Now go to Isaiah 28. Well, I want to read verse 1 and then we'll drop down to verse 7. Now in this he's talking about Ephraim, and remember Ephraim here, although it's the name of a tribe, is also a symbol of the whole house of Israel, all the mixed tribes, because Ephraim became the predominant tribe within the northern kingdom of Israel. And remember Shiloh, which was a place, you know, where Joshua set up camp and had the tabernacle and everything set, Shiloh was in Samaria. In verse 1 of Isaiah 28 it says, woe to the crown of pride, to the drunkards of Ephraim, whose glorious beauty is as a fading flower, which is at the head of the verdant valleys, are the valleys of fatness. This is what this is saying. To those who are overcome with wine. And then he goes on down in verse 7, he says, but they also have erred through wine, and through intoxicating drink are out of the way. The priest and the prophet have erred through intoxicating drink. They are swallowed up by wine. They are out of the way through intoxicating drink. Out of the way. What is the way? The way, Derek, 1840, it's the way of life, or the course of life, the way you're supposed to live. That's what the priest is supposed to be teaching the people. If they're out and not living the way of life, how in the world are you going to teach it to somebody else? How can you? If you're not walking in obedience to Torah, then what are you teaching somebody? You're sure not teaching them Torah. What are you teaching? Teaching the way you live. Teaching them to live that way. If you're winding up going in the lake of fire, then those you're teaching are going to be there with you. They are out of the way through intoxicating drink. They err in vision. They stumble in judgment. So I'm saying, some of the great sages and the rabbis today, they teach that Nadab and Abihu were drunk, and that's the reason why he killed them. Needless to say, I disagree with that. Because back in verse 10, you know, in Leviticus 10, it says what? That you may distinguish between holy and unholy, and between unclean and clean. If that was a truth, and all the priests are supposed to be able to do that, and the priests are supposed to teach the people, then aren't the people supposed to be able to learn and distinguish between what's unholy or holy and what's clean and unclean? If we're supposed to distinguish and we know the difference, but we choose one or the other, if we choose the wrong one, then we are deliberately rejecting him, right? Verse 11, and that you may teach the children of Israel all the statutes which Yahweh has spoken to them by the hand of Moses. Everybody's supposed to learn. If we are considering ourselves part of the children of Israel, aren't these statutes then what we're supposed to learn? Verse 12. Well, wait, before we go there, still talking about clean and unclean. Go to Hebrews 5. I know a lot of you have already heard this. Maybe some of you haven't, but I just feel impressed. We got to do this again anyway. In Hebrews chapter 5, starting in verse 9, we're going to read 9 through 14. It says, and having been perfected, he became the author of eternal salvation to all who obey him. Is he and the Father one? Then if we obey him, we obey the Father. If we obey him and the Father, then what are we following? The Word. So we're obeying the Word. If we're not obeying him, then we're not following the Word. And he became the author of eternal salvation to all who obey him. Is obedience to the law going to get you saved? No. No, it never did. But obedience to the law will teach you about the one who's going to come and deliver you from that death. But if you don't follow the law in order to learn and know who he is, then when he comes, you don't know him, and he's going to say to you, depart from me, I never knew you, you who practice lawlessness. That's the whole thing. The only salvation we have in eternal life is through his shed blood and what he did for us, right? But that's not an excuse to not know him. And he said if they'd known the Father, they'd know me, but they didn't know the Father, so they didn't know him when he came. In verse 10, he says, called by Yahweh as high priest according to the order of Melchizedek. I know most people say Melchizedek, but it's two Hebrew words. Malchi meaning king, Zedek meaning righteousness. So the name of this guy was the King of Righteousness. That's kind of a picture of Messiah Yahushua, isn't it? Only is he king yet, or is he Sar Shalom? He is our Prince of Peace, right? And the Prince of Righteousness. In verse 11, of whom we have much to say, and hard to explain, since you have become dull of hearing. For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need to be taught again the first principles of the oracles, or the words, or the sayings of Yahweh, and you have come to need milk and not solid food. For everyone who partakes only of milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. But solid food belongs to those who are of full age, those who by reason of use or practice have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. See, that's what he was talking to Aaron and them sons about. That's why he killed those two, because they had profaned things. And he said, hey, this is what he's talking about. I'm holy, therefore you be holy. You have to be set apart. You have to discern between good and evil. That's what they have to do. If you're going to teach somebody else out there, you can't be telling them one thing and doing something else. Go to 1 Timothy. In chapter 1. And then he's writing here to Timothy in verse 2. To Timothy, my true son in the faith, grace, mercy, peace, or mercy, grace, favor, mercy and peace from Yahweh, our Father, and Yahushua HaMashiach, our Master. Remember, Yahweh says he keeps mercy and covenant with those who obey him to 1,000 generations. Verse 3, as I urged you when I went into Macedonia, remain in Ephesus, that you may charge some or command some that they teach no other doctrine, nor give heed to fables and endless genealogies which cause disputes rather than godly edification which is in faith. Now he's being charged in this letter here to Timothy to teach no other doctrine. The New Testament hadn't been written yet, so what doctrines is he being commanded to teach? The Torah, the Tanakh, the Torah, the prophet. New Testament didn't exist yet, not the way we have it today. Verse 5, now the purpose of the commandment is love from a pure heart, a good conscience and sincere faith, from which some, having strayed, have turned aside to idle talk, desiring to be teachers of the law, understanding neither what they say nor the things which they affirm. But we know that the law is good if one uses it lawfully. Knowing this, that the law is not made for a righteous person, but for the lawless and the insubordinate, for the ungodly and for sinners, for the unholy and profane, for murderers of fathers and murderers of mothers, for manslayers, fornicators, sodomites, for kidnappers, for liars, for perjurers, and if there is any other thing that is contrary to sound doctrine. Anything that doesn't match Torah is what? It's all them other things. Or leads to all those other things. So the only thing that you're supposed to live your life by is according to what? According to Torah, according to the doctrines. Verse 11, according to the glorious gospel or good news of the blessed Yahweh, which was committed to my trust. What were they teaching? What was Paul charging Timothy to teach? Nothing but Torah. Torah, the prophets, the Psalms. Nothing else mattered. That's all Paul was trying to teach. Remember when it talks about those, they were more noble, in Berea than those in Thessalonica, and everything that Paul said, they went and checked everything out to see if he was telling the truth. Well, if the Bereans were there today, and they're being told that Paul said the law was done away with, and they went to the Scriptures to find out where it said that, you reckon they'd find it? Where would they find it? In the Torah or the prophets? Where would they find anything that said the law had been done away with? What they would find is words that said like forever, and la'olam, to the vanishing point, or perpetual. That's a long way from being done away with, isn't it? So true people today, Bereans, if they hear something, what are they going to find out? What are they going to go check? Go check the Torah. If I tell you something, somebody will tell you something, where do you go? Check it. Go to the Torah to find out what it says. In verse 5, now the purpose of the commandment is love. I just want everybody to note this word love, and that's the word number 26 in the Greek text, and it's the word agape. We've all heard people talk about agape, right? 26, 25, both of them are the,
You're still in Timothy, right?
Yes, still in Timothy. Still in Timothy. Verse 5. I'm talking about in the Greek text. Number 26. In verse 5 there, the word purpose. Some Bibles have the word end. The number is 5056. Okay? So the purpose or the goal or the end, I don't, it's hard to know whatever translated people are reading, but the number of the word there is 5056. It's a Greek word telos. And it means goal or the point aimed at. So the point aimed at of all these commandments is what? Love. Now we're back to what is this love? And this word, number 26, it means, charity. Some Bibles have the word charity or love or something. But it means benevolence. Or it can mean affection for, okay? I don't know, maybe y'all already know what benevolence means, but I had to go look it up. Benevolence means the disposition to do good. When we learn how great Yahweh is and how great the Scriptures are, don't we want to go share it with everybody? We want them to have the same good that we got, right? And then when you're trying to share with them and they look at you like you're some kind of an insect, that you're bothering them, and they're trying to slap you away. So you finally go away. But in the meantime, what do we love this word, and if we love this word, then we love Yehoshua, right? And if this word's the Father, then we love the Father. But you can't say you love the Father and you love the Word and hate and the Son and hate this word. You can't say I love you and not do. He said, if you love me, keep my commandments. Didn't he say that over in the Gospel of John? Didn't he also say that anybody says I love him but doesn't do what he said do is a liar and the truth not in him? I think that's over in 1 John. So this love here not looking at this definitions in Webster's or dictionaries or anything else. Let's just go over to 1 John chapter 5 and see what he says love is in the living of it. We haven't been to 1 John in a long time. You know that? 1 John in chapter 5, verses 2 and 3. And I know there's other people that have other verses and chapters that they like better than this one, but this is one of my favorites. 1 John chapter 5, verse 2, he says, by this we know that we love the children of Elohim when we love Elohim and keep his commandments. You see, if you're not keeping his commandments, then you really have no love for the other people. If you're not keeping his commandments, you don't have any love for your children. You don't have any love for your family. You don't have love for nobody except yourself if you're not keeping his commandments. Verse 3 says, for this is the love of El, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. You know how many people in the world today tell you can't keep all them commandments? Nobody can do that. It's too big a job. You just can't do it. It's too hard. And yet this right here said it's not burdensome. It's not hard to keep his commandments. So how come people don't do it? They're too busy following their own desires. Their love is strictly for themselves and not anybody else. When people get married and start having problems and fights and squabbles and all this kind of stuff, what causes it? Selfishness on the part of one or both. When two people, all you can look at is what are you doing to satisfy what I want? Is that what happens? Okay. But yet the satisfaction of marriage only comes from what? When both people turn toward Yahweh. Yahweh has to be number one with the husband and number one with the wife. And if it's not, then there's never going to be any peace between the two. Because when number one with him and number one with her, then that becomes a threefold cord that you can't break. Okay? But Yahweh has to be number one with both of them. If you can't make Yahweh number one in your life, right, how are you going to make anybody else anything? Because if he's not number one, then the only thing you're looking to satisfy is yourself, and that's total selfishness. And that's going to be in any relationship. And I'm not trying to be a philosopher. That's what the word said. Okay. Go to Ezekiel 44. Boy, that's a long way from 1 John. Ezekiel 44. Now, you know, everybody that studies prophecy and everybody that looks at history, and people will all come back and they will say, okay, Ezekiel 38 is when Russia comes down against this or that, and we got this big battle and everything, you know. And of course, that's after the dry bones come alive in chapter 37. Then we get into 40 and everything. Now we're rebuilding the temple, and this new temple is going to be built when Messiah's here. So about the only thing that most people can agree on, Ezekiel chapter 44 is in the future. Ain't here yet, okay? But let's just see what it says about what's going to be in the future in Ezekiel chapter 44 and go to verse 23. Now, well, actually, I guess before we read, back up verse 15. We're not going to read all of that, but verse 15, but the priests, the Levites, the sons of Zadok, who kept charge of my sanctuary, when the sons of Israel went astray from me, they shall come near me to minister to me, and they shall stand before me to offer to me the fat and the blood, says Yahweh Elohim. So he's talking about the priesthood of the future. Verse 23. And they shall teach my people between the holy and the unholy, and cause them to discern between the unclean and the clean. That's exactly the same thing he said about Aaron, his son. What was in the past is what's going to be in the future. I think in Ecclesiastes it says that which will be is that which has already been, and there's nothing new under the sun. When are we going to learn to believe that? I mean, people out here making all these mistakes and bringing all troubles and kind of stuff on themselves, all they got to do is read the Torah and find out what not to do. Because everybody's done it before you. Verse 24, he says, in controversy they shall stand as judges and judge according to my judgments. You see, The Levitical priesthood today in Rabbinic Judaism, they say that they have the right, when you go before them, they can tell you what to do and how to do it and how to act and what to believe, what not to believe, because Yahweh has given them the authority to tell you what to do. And that's only partially true. Because the Scripture actually says, when you have a problem and you need it to be what? Explained, then you go before the priest in that day, and then they will give you the understanding of what to do based on what the Torah says. So whatever instruction they give you is that which is already written in Torah. So it's not them making up their own, it's only about what Yahweh said. But how many people today don't go by what's written? They go by what the elders say. They go by what the pastor said. They go by what the priest said. They go by what the rabbi said. Talks to the Church of Christ and he says, oh, I'll go talk to my evangelist. Or whatever they are. Everybody's got somebody. How many times do you ever try to tell somebody something and they say, well, I'll go to the Scripture and check that out? You'd fall over backwards if they did, wouldn't you? I mean, it just doesn't happen that much. But again, in verse 24, they shall stand as judges and judge according to my judgment. They shall keep my laws and my statutes in all my appointed meetings, and they shall hallow my Sabbath. That's in the future. Well, what are we supposed to be doing now? Just living like hell until the future gets here? That's tomorrow. Or the next 5 minutes. I'm not trying to be facetious, but everybody's trying to go to sleep. I'm trying to wake them up. Okay. Go to Malachi chapter 3. Malachi is that one right in front of Matthew. Malachi is a book containing the prophecies of Elijah to come and so on and so forth, Messiah coming, And remember, Malachi means what? My messenger. Malak. Malak is the word in the Hebrew which means messenger, which has been translated as angel most times. And then, Christianity has given all these ideas of angels with wings and all this kind of stuff, even though the Scripture never said anything about that. But Malachi, Malak, messenger from Yahweh, and then he says Malachi, the E means my messenger, is what this word it means. So in chapter 3, starting in verse 16, it says, then those who feared Yahweh, those who have a fear of Yahweh, spoke to one another, and Yahweh listened and heard. So a book of remembrance was written before him for those who fear Yahweh and who meditate or esteem his name. Is it important that we esteem his name? Do we meditate? Do we esteem? Do we think about it? Do we care? Do we use his name or something else? Do we use the title? Do we use his name? What is his name? Verse 17, he said, they shall be mine, says Yahweh of hosts, on the day that I make them my... Most Bibles have the word jewels there. Actually, the same word as it is over in Exodus there, my special treasure. When I make them my special treasure, and I will spare them, as a man spares his own son who serves him. Then you shall again discern between the righteous and the wicked, between one who serves ill and one who does not serve him. Does that give you a definition of who's wicked and who's righteous? Kind of like who do and who don't. Right? Does it then give you the opportunity to be able to look at somebody and be able to discern whether they're right or wrong, whether they're righteous or wicked based on what they do? Don't matter what they say. Go back to Leviticus 10. We got to go on. But I think it's important to understand here that all this thing took place with Aaron and his sons because what? It's based on determining what's righteous and what's not, what's clean and what's unclean. And this is something that's going to be, it was then, it's now, it will be again in the future. It's never changed. The difference between clean and unclean is the difference between tahor or tameh. Verse 12. Then Moshe spoke to Aaron and to Eleazar and Ithamar, his sons who were left. Anybody ever notice that little part there? Who were left. Other two are gone. He had 4, now he got 2. 2 of them died. Take the grain offering that remains of the offerings made by fire to Yahweh and eat it without leaven beside the altar, for it is most holy. And you shall eat it in a holy place, because it is your due. and your sons do of the sacrifices made by fire to Yahweh, for so I have been commanded. The breast of the wave offering, the thigh of the heave offering, you shall eat in a clean place, you, your sons, and your daughters with you, for they are your due and your sons' due, given from the sacrifices of peace offerings of the children of Israel, the sons of Israel. The thigh of the heave offering and the breast of the wave offering they shall bring with the offerings of fat made by fire to offer as a wave offering before Yahweh. And it shall be yours and your sons with you by a statute forever, as Yahweh has commanded. Then Moshe diligently made inquiry about the goat of the sin offering, and there it was, burned up. And he was angry with Eleazar and Ithamar, the sons of Aaron, who were left, saying, Why have you not eaten the sin offering in a holy place, since it is most holy, and Elohim has given it to you to bear the guilt of the congregation, to make atonement for them before Yahweh? Why haven't you eaten it, he's asking. See, its blood was not brought inside the holy place. Indeed, you should have eaten it in the holy place, as I commanded. And Aaron said to Moses, Look, this day they have offered their sin offering and their burnt offering before Yahweh, and such things have befallen me. If I had eaten the sin offering today, would it have been accepted in the sight of Yahweh? Yeah, his heart was not in it, right? I mean, he just lost 2 sons, right? He did the things, he did everything. He stayed in obedience. He didn't tear his garments. He didn't uncover anything. He didn't say nothing bad. He didn't do anything. He said, oh, now I couldn't eat this, right? Has anybody ever been so sick sometimes with grief you just can't eat? If you go ahead and do it, it just makes somebody, feel good. It makes somebody else feel good to say you're eating, but it doesn't help you. But he said, if I had eaten it, would it have been acceptable to Yahweh? So when Moshe heard, he was content. He understood. I think sometimes as we're studying, as we're reading, we don't ever really think about the emotions and the feelings of the people that they have. They were people just like us. Scripture says the prophets were men just like we are. They were tested, they were beset with the same problems that we had. One of the first things we have when you start trying to walk in obedience to Yahweh's word was members of the family, they don't want to accept, they don't want to do it. They get mad, they think you're crazy, right? When Messiah came, he said, don't think I came to bring peace. I didn't come to bring peace. He brought a sword, right? A sword is something that divides, right? Sword can be two-edged. It can cut both ways. A sword can divide. This is the sword of the Spirit, which is what? The word of Yahweh. It divides. It can bring life to one, it can bring death to the other. What you choose determines who you are. What you choose determines who belongs to you, right? The Hebrew people talking about we are chosen. What are they chosen to do? Deuteronomy chapter 30 says, I set before you this day life and blessings, death and curses. Therefore you choose. We are chosen to choose. And that's amazing. What you choose. Chapter 11. From this point on, Leviticus, or Vayikra, the book, deals mostly with the daily life of those who are called. Remember, Vayikra, the name of the book in Hebrew, means, and he called. So from this point on, it deals with the daily life of all those who he has called. What has he called you to do? Come out of the world. He called the people out of Egypt. The word Egypt in the Hebrew is Mitzrayim, right? And what does it mean? Dire straits or bondage. He called you to come out of bondage. Egypt is a picture of the world. Have we called to come out of the world? Have we been called to come out of pagan stuff, come out of false stuff? We've been called to come out and come to him, right? And what does he say? Those who he has called, and now he gives you how you're supposed to live. In the Pentateuch, I'm going to, there's a little note here, I think it's kind of interesting. Those of you who have a Pentateuch, it's in page 448. We're getting into the laws of purity. We're getting the laws of dietary, what to eat, and so on and so forth. The Torah. Now, remember the Pentateuch, and these notes that I'm reading are people that don't accept Messiah as Yehoshua, okay? But they're saying the Torah takes the whole of human life as its providence. In the eyes of the Torah, nothing human is secular. Nothing human is secular. If we talk about the Hebrew people over in Israel today, people say, well, most of them are very secular. What does that mean? They're looking at the world and living according to the world and their rules and everything. They don't care anything about the word of Yahweh. They're living according to the world. That's secular. But according to this says, in the eyes of the Torah, nothing human is secular. The Torah says everything that you live and have life by is supposed to be of Yahweh, not of the world. Is that right? It penetrates into the home of the Israelite and aims at controlling even the most intimate relations of his domestic existence. It is of the utmost importance to grasp this characteristic feature of the Torah. The Torah, the law of Yahweh, embraces the whole of life with all its action, and as none of these actions can be withdrawn from the unity of life, so can the Torah not be excluded from any of them. The Torah tells you how to live, what to wear, what to eat, what to don't eat. After you've eaten and are full, where to put it. Take a shovel, cover it. Everything. I'm not trying to be gross, but I mean every little detail concerning your life has been covered in His Word, right? A healthy soul and a healthy body is clearly the ideal. Remember, He said, I'll put none of the diseases of Egypt on you if you obey me. A lot of us have a lot of problems in our life back when we didn't obey Him. Well, now we're planting new seeds, right? But He says, as you sow, so shall you reap. We're still planting seeds. We're looking forward to the new crop and hoping that we can get that new crop and get rid of that old crop that we reaped. We're planting the new one. The regulations prescribed in these chapters are means towards the attainment of that end, and therefore they have a spiritual purpose that is of eternal worth. My word shall never pass away, He said. His Word created everything else in the world, right? His Word created everything out of something you can't even see. But if everything that you can see was made from something you can't see, which one is the real one? The one you can't see. And if His Word is eternal, and if His Word lives in you, and it says Messiah had the words of life, right? Eternal life. So if His Word lives in you, then eternal life lives in you. And if His eternal Word, the eternal life, lives in you, then you have eternal life. But if His Word is the only thing that's eternal, and if that Word don't live in you, do you have eternal life? That's not a hard concept to get a hold of, I don't think. The Scripture says His Word is eternal. When you get down to the dietary laws, it said Yahweh clearly brought the people out of Egypt to be a set-apart people, a consecrated people, a people apart, distinguished from all others, by outward rites which in themselves help to constitute the set-apartness or holiness. This thought of being a holy people or set-apart people, a light which is supernaturally kindled. Think about that. If the Word became Messiah, if Messiah and the Word are light, then if the Word Messiah, Yahweh, lives in you, then other people see the light in you. And that light doesn't come from something else. It comes from Yahweh. Do you make people want what you have? If you don't, maybe we're doing something wrong. A kingdom of priests, sanctified in themselves and sanctified for the rest of the world's sake. This sublime thought would be daily impressed on their minds by these commandments which would separate them from other nations. Why does the rest of the world hate the Yehudi, people of the land, the children of Israel? Because in no other nation in the world, what other nation did Yahweh ever tell you how to dress? What other nation did Yahweh tell you what to eat? Whatever nation did Yahweh tell you, I'm going to give you this land, I'm going to bring you in, I'm going to lead you, I'm going to do this for you, so that they can be a light to the rest of the world. Why does the rest of the world hate them? Because in them they see Yahweh and they don't want to be reminded of who and what He is, because it also reminds them then of what they are supposed to be doing themselves, and they don't want to. Anybody rejecting the Torah of Yahweh is no better than the Palestinians trying to kill the Yehudi. There's no difference in it. Anybody in this country today is trying to come against the Yehudi are no different than Palestinians or Hamas or any other terrorist of the world. Think about that thought. Anybody then who's also going against the Word is Messiah, is also Antichrist. Boy, that's a tough thought. The commandments that he gave them would furthermore prevent a close and intimate association with heathens, which would result in complete absorption into the heathen way. Indeed, the dietary laws have proven an important factor in the preservation of the race of people in the past and are, in more than one respect, an irreplaceable agency for maintaining the identity of the Hebrew. You can tell who you are by what you eat. Think about that. If you eat the Word and then you represent the Word, they can tell who you are by what you ate. They looked at Peter and John and the rest of the apostles and they said that, well, all we could tell, they've been with Messiah. They look at these guys, here's a bunch of what, fishermen. And they come out teaching and preaching. And they're telling them rabbis, you know, that's the thing that made them so mad. How do these people, you're talking about a 12-year-old child, name of Yehoshua, reasoning and then arguing with the priest, and they're looking at one another and say, how did this kid get so smart? Okay, enough of that. I didn't mean to preach, but boy, it's good stuff. So again, in verse 1, and Yahweh spoke to Moshe and Aaron, saying to them, speak to the sons of Israel, saying, these are the animals which you may eat among all the beasts that are on the earth. Among the beasts, whatever divides a hoof, having cloven hoofs and chewing the cud, that you may eat. Nevertheless, these you shall not eat among those that chew the cud, or those that have cloven hoofs. The camel, because it chews the cud, but does not have cloven hoofs, is unclean to you. I think somebody told me one time that a camel ate the cud and had cloven hoofs, but the Bible says they don't. Did John wear camel skin? That's an unclean animal. Did Messiah ride on the donkey? That's unclean. But they didn't eat them. Is it all right to have pigskin gloves? Don't eat the gloves. I mean, what I'm trying to get at is we need to go back and what it really says, not trying to make out something else. You know, oh man, he got on that donkey, he's going to die. No, he ain't. He's going to ride into Jerusalem. Verse 5. The rock hyrax, or the rock badger, because it chews the cud but does not have cloven hoofs, is unclean to you. How about rabbit? Do they have cloven hoof? But they chew the cud. But they're unclean. People realize that you can pick up a disease called rabbit fever just through the palms of your hand from handling rabbits? Verse 6, the hare, because it chews the cud but does not have cloven hoofs, is unclean to you. And the swine, though it divides the hoof, having cloven hoofs, yet does not chew the cud, is unclean to you. Their flesh you shall not eat, and their carcasses you shall not touch. They are unclean to you. Oh boy. Go to 1 Timothy chapter 4. We get into this kind of fashion because there's always people that are going to run into other people out and say, well, don't you know that Timothy tells us we can eat anything we want to? So we'll look at 1 Timothy chapter 4, verses 1 through 6 here and find out what it really says. In verse 1 of 1 Timothy chapter 4, it says, now the Spirit, the breath, the Word expressly says, you'll notice it's not just some kind of a spirit floating around, but it's also the Word that says it. That in latter times some will depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons. And then it says, speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their own conscience seared with a hot iron. Now these next few verses are going to be some of these deceiving thoughts and deceiving doctrines of demons. Verse 3, forbidding to marry. Now, if you'll notice, and commanding to, those words are not actually in the text. The actual Greek text there just says, for beginning to marry, to abstain from foods. The implication is they also forbid, or they tell you to abstain from foods. Notice this is saying in Timothy that you can't marry and there are certain things you can't eat. Isn't that what this is saying? Now, who says you can't marry? That's in the Catholic priesthood, is it not? You can't marry, you know. They got television shows. Do you notice the new show that's coming on TV right now, and the title of it is what? God or the Girl.
Is what?
God or the Girl.
What?
They either choose God or the girl. Well, it don't matter. They go on who God is anyway. But that's the title of it. These are guys who are trying to go into the priesthood in the Catholic Church, and they're trying to decide whether to choose God, the priesthood, or go, get married. I'm not telling you I agree with it. I just thought it's advertised on TV. Okay. But forbidding to marry and to abstain from foods which Yahweh created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. We're reading in Leviticus chapter 11 where Yahweh told us the foods that we can eat, right? Who said there are certain foods that we can't eat on Friday? You can't eat meat on Friday, you got to have fish. Who said that? Must have been Catholic Church, huh? So he's saying that in these latter days, the deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons were going to prevail. Some of them including forbidding to marry, to abstain from foods which Yahweh created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. For every creature of Yahweh is good, and nothing is to be refused if it is received with thanksgiving, for it is sanctified or set apart by the word of Yahweh and prayer. Now, where do you find the food set apart in the word of Yahweh? Leviticus chapter 11. That's what we're reading. Right? Remember, prayer doesn't mean praying to Him and saying, I thank you for the food and I hope that you'll nourish my body with this pieces of pork chop or whatever they're doing. But prayer is also just to say, I thank you. Prayer is nothing in the world but communication with Yahweh. Maybe it's just because you wake up in the morning and you look up at the ceiling and say, praise Yahweh, I woke up again. I mean, whatever it is, that's you're communicating what I'm trying to get across. It doesn't matter what you say. It's what you think and what you feel and who you are, and then the communication you have with Yahweh in whatever instance it is. So if we go back to Leviticus 11 now, we're still eating what he said is set apart. Notice that. And that's what Timothy said. We're going to read a little bit more, then we're going to go over to Acts chapter 10 and look at what Peter saw. Because them pastors out there saying Peter just didn't have any idea what he was talking about or seeing. In verse 9 he said, these you may eat of all that are in the water. Whatever in the water has fins and scales, whether in the seas or in the rivers, that you may eat. How about a lobster? They got fins and scales? How about shrimp? Really? How about them little things, them little round things?
Scallops.
Scallops, you mean they don't either? See, that was my favorite. I mean, everybody had a favorite in the world, didn't they? That was the one that I liked. You know what they got now? They got scallops out there wrapped in bacon. It's like poison on poison, isn't it? Verse 10, but all in the seas or in the rivers that do not have fins and scales, all that move in the water, or any living thing which is in the water, they are an abomination to you. Now, if that's an abomination and you eat it, that makes you an abomination before Yahweh, don't it? What about catfish? Uh-oh. They ain't got no scales. You have to skin them. Okay. They shall be an abomination to you. You shall not eat their flesh, but you shall regard their carcasses as an abomination. Whatever in the water does not have fins or scales shall be an abomination to you. Oh, no more crab cakes. All that kind of stuff. Okay. Verse 13. Now, verse 13 says, and these you shall regard as an abomination among the birds. They shall not be eaten. He never tells you what birds you can eat. He just tells us here a list of what you can't eat. But there is one qualifying factor in here. We'll look at it. These you shall regard as an abomination among the birds. They shall not be eaten. They are an abomination. The eagle, the vulture, the buzzard, the kite and the falcon after its kind, every raven after its kind. Verse 16, the ostrich. I'm telling you right now, that is a poor translation, because the Hebrew word for ostrich, literally, there is bat haya'ana. Bat haya'ana. What does bat mean in Hebrew? Daughter. Haya'ana means what?
Owl.
The owl. So you shall not eat the daughters of the owl. Now, why did somebody translate this as ostrich in the King James?
Because they didn't like them.
Because they got this weird sound that they make. Has anybody ever stood in front of about a 12-foot tall male ostrich
You just made him holler.
and have him holler at you? Has anybody ever done that? And when he hollered, the ground shook. I mean, you know, and all of a sudden he plops it. But an ostrich is 12 foot tall. That's a good-sized bird. But because of the sound they make, then they say like a screech owl, so they said ostrich in here. But actually the Hebrew says the daughter of the owl. An owl is a meat-eating predator, right? If you look at all those things, the eagle, the vulture, the buzzard, the kite, the falcon, raven, all of those are meat-eating predators. You see what the connection is among all these that you can't eat? And then he says the ostrich, which is really the daughter of the owl, the short-eared owl, the seagull, the hawk after its kind, the little owl, the fish owl, the screech owl, the white owl, the jackdaw, the carrion vulture, the stork, the heron after its kind, the hoopoe, and the bat. If y'all notice in that, does it say that a stork is that unclean bird?
Yes.
Y'all notice the only time that he ever talked about any kind of creatures, women having wings like storks coming to carry a basket, and there was a woman in the basket with a lead case on it, and he said to the woman in the basket, he said, "What, this is evil." And the women carrying it with wings of stork carried it where? To Shinar, the land of Babylon. And they set it down there. He said, "This is evil." Where is most of the wickedness in the world coming from right now? Coming out of Iraq, Iran. He never tells us any more than about what birds we can eat. So if these birds here, and all of these kind, the stork, the heron after its kind, the hoopoe, and the bat, these are all meat-eating animals. So the birds that we can eat would be those that did not eat meat. Now everybody's going to have some kind of a different idea about this, okay? But if we look at doves and so forth, they're grain eaters, right? Pigeons, they eat grain. Chickens, they eat grain. Anybody ever watch an ostrich and what he eats and what he grazes on? What do they eat? They graze on grass. Ducks eat grass, vegetation, roots and stuff like that. Geese, what do they graze on? They graze on grass, just like an ostrich does. I'm not saying that you have to go eat these things or anything else, but I'm saying the difference in them is because of what they eat. A dove or a pigeon are in the same family. And you could eat them, right? And remember, those were even brought as sacrifices and so forth. Okay. Now, I can't tell you much about these insects because I try not to eat as many of them as possible, but if you have to, you can eat these. All flying insects that creep on all fours shall be an abomination to you. All flying insects that creep on all fours. Have you ever noticed a wasp when he lights? You know, he's flying around, but he's walking on four legs. Isn't that something? Yet these you may eat of every flying insect that creeps on all fours, those which have jointed legs above their feet with which to leap on the earth. Thou like a grasshopper. Or a cricket. I'll be honest with you, I haven't tried them either. Verse 22, these you may eat, the locust after its kind, the destroying locust after its kind, the cricket after its kind, the grasshopper after its kind. But all flying insects which have 4 feet shall be an abomination to you. Verse 24, by these you shall become unclean. Whoever touches the carcass of any of them shall be unclean until evening. When it says carcass, this is not talking about just an animal that you just killed, okay? It's talking about an animal who's dead and maybe you didn't kill it or you came upon it, it's dead, it's been there for a while, and all of a sudden it's unclean. And after so many hours, this thing begins, you know, how long can you eat a piece of meat laying out on the table in the kitchen somewhere before it becomes contaminated? Even if it's a piece of beef, which was unclean to start with. If you kill a pig, you know, the carcass, you're skinning it and you're going to take the hide and make something out of it. You throw the carcass away, but you tan the hide. Are you unclean? Yeah, you are until evening. You have to take a bath and clean. But you're not going to eat it. Camel skin, camel hair, that you weave and, you know, make things out of. You're handling the part of the animal that is dead. So that's, if you come upon a carcass somewhere laying out there and it's not exactly, you don't know what it is, who killed it, how it got killed, or nothing else, best thing to do is leave it alone. Verse 25, whoever carries part of the carcass of any of them shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. Now, if he said don't do anything, touch it, why would he say whoever carries it becomes unclean? So somebody's going to carry it. Verse 26, that of any beast which divides the foot but is not cloven hoofed or does not choose the cud is unclean to you. Everyone who touches it shall be unclean. As we go on through the scriptures and we find out that somebody becomes unclean by touching a dead body or carcass, what are the things that they can't do while they're in that state? Can't go in the temple.
The temple.
That means if you're a priest and your job's in the temple, you can't go in and do your job until you become clean. If you're unclean, you cannot eat the sacrifice of the Passover. You can't eat of the festival if you're unclean. You have to wait until you're clean. Verse 27, whatever goes on its paws among all kinds of animals that go on all fours, those are unclean to you. Does that include a cat and a dog? Can you have a pet? Yeah, but don't eat it. Don't. Whoever touches any such carcass shall be unclean until evening. Whoever carries such carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. It is unclean to you. That's tameh. It is unclean. And if you touch it, what happened to you? You become unclean. If you got a barrel of good apples and you throw one bad one in there, all the rest of them going to get bad, or is that bad one going to get good? Come on. Why do we stay away from unclean things? Because it will contaminate us. If you don't get rid of the contamination that's within the camp, right, then everybody else is going to be contaminated. Verse 29. These next few instructions that we read here, I mentioned earlier about the time of the plague and everything, and the instructions that we're reading now is what protected the Hebrew people during the time of the plagues and so forth. They were protected because of their obedience. Remember, and I don't have time to show it right now, but obedience to the Torah, the blessings are inherent in the act of obedience. Disobedience to the Torah, the curses are inherent in the disobedience. Whether you see it, whether you don't, whether you feel it, whether you hear it, whatever, the curse or the bless comes based on what you do in regards to what it says. Verse 29, these also shall be unclean to you among the creeping things that creep on the earth, the mole, the mouse, the large lizard after its kind. That word lizard there in the Hebrew actually means a turtle. No more mock turtle soup. They're unclean to you. The gecko, the monster lizard, the sand reptile, the sand lizard, and the chameleon. These are unclean to you among all that creep. Whoever touches them, when they are dead. I don't go out there jumping on somebody because I got a pet turtle in a whatever, or some kid running around with a frog in his pocket. Teach them, don't eat them. Okay, and if he dies, well then he's unclean. And anyway, whoever touches them when they are dead shall be unclean until evening. Anything on which any of them falls, when they are dead, shall be unclean, whether it's an item of wood or clothing or skin or sack. Whatever item it is in which any work is done, it must be put in water, and it shall be unclean until evening. Then it shall be clean. He's talking about washing it. Any earthen vessel into which any of these things falls, you shall break, and whatever is in it shall be unclean. An earthen vessel will be kind of like a clay pot or a clay jar or something like that. That is porous, okay? There's a lot of things that have been fired, but they're still porous. Ceramic, some of those things have a glaze over them that's been fired and burnt, and these are non-porous. This is not talking about the same thing, just a plain old clay jar. Just like a porcelain cup or something like that. Copper, metal, anything that can be washed or cleaned or cleansed in a fire. Yes, sir.
Unclean until evening, meaning the end of that day?
Yes, starts a new day at sundown. In verse 33, any earthen vessel into which any of them falls you shall break, and whatever is in it shall be unclean. In such a vessel, any edible food upon which water falls becomes unclean, and any drink that may be drunk from it becomes unclean. And everything on which a part of any such carcass falls. A lot of these words here are put in by the translators to fill out the meaning of the words. So everything on which anything falls of the carcass shall be unclean, whether it's an oven or a cooking stove, it shall be broken down, for they are unclean and shall be unclean to you. Remember, when this was written, an oven or a cooking stove was what? Pile of bricks or a little thing built outside, you know, that had a hearth or something. It wasn't talking about a steel porcelainized stove with a ceramic top and everything that you can wash. Talking about something that's outside. Nevertheless, a spring or a cistern in which there is plenty of water shall be clean, but whatever touches any such carcass becomes unclean. A cistern or a spring, water comes up and fills. Something dead falls into it. How come you can drink from it later? Because it continually flows and it cleanses itself. Verse 37, and if a part of any such carcass falls on any planting seed which is to be sown, it remains clean. Why would that be if it's unclean? Put a seed in the ground and put dirt and water on top of it, it's got to rot before it can start to grow anyway.
You're not eating
Anybody thought
that
about
seed.
that? And you're not eating it. Yeah, it's going to grow, and from that one seed can come a whole lot of things. But if any water is put on the seed and a part of any such carcass falls on it, it becomes unclean to you. If that's an unclean seed, and you can't eat it. And if any beast which you may eat dies, he who touches its carcass shall be unclean until evening. Now, it's not talking about one that you killed. It's talking about if it died and then you go grab it. You're going to be unclean until evening. He who eats of its carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. He also who carries its carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. You see what it's talking about? It's talking about the carcass, something that died and you don't know how. And every creeping thing that creeps on the earth shall be an abomination. It shall not be eaten. Whatever crawls or moves on its belly, that includes a snake, whatever goes on all fours, or whatever has many feet among all creeping things that creep on the earth, that's kind of like a centipede, isn't it? Or a sow bug. You don't want to eat them little rolled up boogers. These you shall not eat, for they are an abomination. I'm sorry. You shall not make yourselves abominable with any creeping thing that creeps, nor shall you make yourselves unclean with them, lest you be defiled by them. Isn't that amazing? You're going to be defiled by those things. Verse 44, he says, for Ani Yahweh, I. Am is implied. The Hebrew word Ani just means I. Ani Yahweh, your El. He's saying, I'm Yahweh, I'm the one that created you. You shall therefore sanctify or set yourselves apart, and you shall be holy or set apart, for I am set apart. Neither shall you defile yourself with any creeping thing that creeps on the earth. If the whole nation was supposed to be certified a kingdom of priests set apart for his use, right? Then all these people that are following Yahweh and walking strictly in obedience to his word, the rest of the world is going to look at them and see what? They're going to see Yahweh in them. But if the Hebrew people never followed his word, then when the people looked at him, what did they see? They really didn't see him, did they? But then when people start claiming things, well, you can't do that to me because I'm the son of the Most High, whatever. They look at you and say, you don't look like it to me. I mean, if you stop and think about it, okay? How many times did Yahweh give them problems because of their disobedience? How many times did he send somebody to attack them and take them into captivity? And then whenever they were, now remember, wherever they were in captivity, you know, if they were down by the Philistines or some other nation or something, and whenever they repent and turn back in obedience, wherever they are, right? Now, when they repented and turned back, he would send them a deliverer. I know the Bible said a savior, but they sent them a deliverer to deliver them, right? But when they repented and turned back where they were, did they start doing sacrifices where they were? No, they couldn't, because all the sacrifices have to be done in Jerusalem. So it was after they repented and started walking in obedience to things they can do, that's when he would bring them back to the land, and that's when they begin to do the other things and celebrate the feast and so forth, okay? Before we can start doing the things that he said do, we have to repent and turn back in obedience to him and go study this word and find out how we're supposed to live. Then we can do the things that we know. But until we know what we're supposed to do, how do you do it? And Yahweh says, when you search for him with all your heart and soul, he says, I will be found by you. Because he's not the one that's lost. Okay? Again, verse 44, for Ani Yahweh, your El, you shall therefore sanctify yourselves, and you shall be holy, or set apart. For I am holy. Neither shall you defile yourself with any creeping thing that creeps on the earth. For Ani Yahweh, I am Yahweh, who brings you up out of the land of Egypt, to be your Elohim. You shall therefore be holy, for I am holy. The number there is 69:18. It's the Hebrew word Kodesh, which means set apart. This is the law of the beast, or concerning beast, and the birds, and every living creature that moves in the waters, and of every creature that keeps on the earth, to distinguish between the unclean and the clean, and between the animal that may be eaten and animal that may not be eaten. How many times did he tell to distinguish between clean and unclean? The priests were distinguished between clean and unclean. Ezekiel, they're going to distinguish between clean and unclean. The future, they're going to distinguish between clean and unclean. This is going to stay the same. Isn't it funny, when the flood came and Noah took all the animals on the ark, there was so many of the clean and so many of the unclean. You mean there was clean and unclean before Noah? You know, that ain't something new. But he wrote it down here because everybody had forgotten it evidently, or didn't know. Okay. Go with me to 2 Samuel. That concludes the reading in the Torah for this day. In 2 Samuel, in chapter 6, I wasn't going to read this today, but then after going back and looking at it again last night, I decided, yeah, well, we will too, because it still fits right in. Remember, as we were reading about the death of Nadab and Abihu in the Sedra, in the Torah portion, it is a warning. Okay? And think about that. This is me saying this, but just think about it. That no type of whim, no type of sudden fancy, or any capricious type of act will be tolerated in the service of Yahweh. You're going to go serve him and make out like everybody else that you're serving him, and you go do something that's not what he said, he will not tolerate that. When the children came against the Philistines and the ark was captured by the Philistines, and they opened the ark and looked in, you know, and all the stuff and everything, he didn't kill them, did he? Because the Torah wasn't given to them. They weren't called to be. But all of a sudden, when people begin to start having all kinds of problems and everything, and you kind of know what the problems were, because what did they go and make and put in the ark and send it back? They went in and made, you know, some little models of golden mice and some models of golden hemorrhoids. Evidently, they were having some real problems. And they put them back in the ark, and they put them in there, and they put it on a cart, you know, and it went and got these two cows and took their calves off of them and pinned them up, and then the cows went on crying and lowing all the way. Now, these calves back here are calling for mama. What makes you think them cows are going to go down to there instead of going back for them calves? Yahweh did it. And when they got down to the children of Israel again, they opened it and looked in, what happened to them? They're dead. But the Philistine didn't have his law. To whom much is given, much is required. Okay? Of course, the Philistine got theirs anyway, because later on, you know, they went back and they were supposed to wipe them out, but they didn't. That's why we still got them running around today. They call themselves Palestinian, or Philistine. Anyway, in chapter 6 of 2 Samuel, I just talking about Nadab and Abihu as being something that they did on a whim or capricious or whatever it was, and it brought their death. The same lesson is enforced here by this reading, by the death of Uzzah, who was guilty of ignoring Yahweh's commands. In verse 1 of 2 Samuel 6, Shmuel, again David gathered all the choice ones of Israel, 30,000. You see, if you get enough people around you to do what you do, then you can feel happy in numbers. Right? But the scriptures also tell us we shall not follow a multitude to do evil. And David arose and went with all the people who were with him from Baal Judah to bring up from there the ark of El, whose name is called by the name Yahweh Sabaoth, Yahweh of hosts, who dwells above the cherubim. I got the word between in there, but actually in the Hebrew text it says above, the cherubim which is on the lid. So they set the ark of El on a new cart, and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, who was on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, drove the new cart. Is Abinadab part of the priesthood? So he knew. Are these sons of him? Should they have known then? The Torah says, what? How is this ark supposed to be moved? Only by the poles that are in the rings on the ark, and it can be carried only by who? By the Levites, right? That's the only way it can be moved. So who else is supposed to move it? But they put it on a cart. Back when the temple, but how did it was carried? It was carried by men on poles on their shoulder. So, and on the hill, and Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, drove the new cart. They brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill, accompanying the ark of El, and Ahio went before the ark. Now, in a lot of ways you can stop and think about it. David gathered all these men. David had pure motivation. He wanted to bring the ark up to Jerusalem because that's where he was. He wanted a temple built for it. And he wanted to bring the ark up where he was. Great motivation, right? It's not that his motivation was bad, but his method was wrong. David should have known how it was supposed to be handled. But they didn't. After all, it says when a man becomes king, what's he supposed to do? He's supposed to write a copy of this Torah. So he's supposed to know. Verse 5, Then David and all the house of Israel played before Yahweh on all kinds of instruments made of fir wood, on harps, on stringed instruments, on tambourines, on cisterns, and on cymbals. All this music and dancing and everything as they bring up the ark, right? And when they came to Nachon's threshing floor, Uzzah put out his hand to the ark of El and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. Then the anger of Yahweh was aroused against Uzzah, and Elohim struck him there for his error, and he died there by the ark of Yahweh. You're not supposed to touch it. If they hadn't put it on the ark, on the cart, the oxen couldn't have stumbled. Nothing would have happened. If it had been done properly, nothing would have happened. Verse 8, and David became angry because of Yahweh's outbreak against Uzzah, and he called the name of the place Perez Uzzah to this day. Perez meaning an outburst against Uzzah. If we go back up in verse 2 again, it said, those with him were from Baal Judah. That word being the lords of Judah. Remember, Baal is the Hebrew word that's translated Lord. Whenever you say Lord, you're just calling him Baal. That was a false god. Okay? So these were the lords of Judah that were with him, and there was 30,000 of these select men out there. Now maybe if they were talking, and they were talking about way to do this and everything, and all of them looked at him and said, oh, well, that was the way it was back then, but we're living in modern time. We don't have to do that old stuff today. Now, I don't know that took place. I'm not trying to suggest that it did. But there's reason up there why it talks about David gathering all these men up, and together they all agreed to do it this way. But now David became angry because of Yahweh's outbreak against Uzzah. David got mad. Who did he get mad at? Was he mad at himself or mad at Yahweh? Probably Yahweh first. David was afraid of Yahweh that day, and he said, how can the ark of Yahweh come to me? So David would not move the ark of Yahweh with him into the city of David, but David took it aside into the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. The ark of Yahweh remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite 3 months, and Yahweh blessed Obed-Edom and all his household. Isn't it amazing? Where the ark of Yahweh dwells, the people are blessed. Think about that. A lot of times we want to, cause, and blame all of our troubles on Yahweh. Remember, it's kind of funny when Yehoshua led the people into, and they went in and they attacked, Jericho, and they won the battle and everything, but then the guy, went and got the gold and the garments and he hid them under the floor of his tent. And then when they went up against the next place, Ai, they lost. And Joshua was out there and he was crying and mourning and everything, and Yahweh asked him, he said, what's the matter with you? If you do right, everything will be fine. But if you don't, it's not going to work so why? And then he went through all the process to find out who did what. Who stole the gold, who stole the garments, and what happened to that guy. His whole family were lost. because of what he coveted. Covetousness is what? Idolatry. Think about that. Covetousness is the things you desire. If they're not Yahweh, then it is idolatry. And whether you're worshiping some wooden tree with gold eyeballs or what, you're still worshiping something, and that's what you're idolizing. Verse 12, and it was told King David, saying, Yahweh has blessed the house of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him because of the ark of Yahweh. So David went and brought up the ark of Yahweh from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with gladness. But now listen how he explains how it does. And so it was, when those bearing the ark of Yahweh had gone 6 paces. Now I bet he got some Levites out there with poles, and they're carrying this thing on they're bearing the ark, right? But they'd take 6 steps and stop. And what they do, take 6 steps, stop. And every time he takes 6 steps, then he sacrificed oxen and fatted sheep. Probably killed a lot of oxen, a lot of sheep on the way to Jerusalem. Then David danced or whirled about before Yahweh with all his might. And David was wearing a linen ephod. He's not naked, he's wearing an ephod, which is what, like an apron. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of Yahweh with shouting and with the sound of the trumpet. And as the ark of Yahweh came into the city of David, Michal, Shaul's daughter, looked through a window and saw King David leaping and whirling before Yahweh, and she despised him in her heart. So they brought the ark of Yahweh and set it in its place in the midst of the tabernacle that David had erected for it. David built a tabernacle, a tent, to put it in. There was no temple, but it was a tent. And everybody could go out and see the ark in the tent. It's called the Tabernacle of David. Doesn't he say that he's going to come and rebuild the Tabernacle of David? It's setting it up in such a way that the ark of Yahweh can be seen in the tent. And in the New Testament Scripture, it doesn't refer to this tent. Peter, this tent. Where is the ark of Yahweh? The witness supposed to be living. It's in us. Then David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before Yahweh. And when David had finished offering burnt offerings and peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of Yahweh of hosts. I wonder what the blessing was that he spoke. Then he distributed among all the people, among the whole multitude of Israel, of both the women and the men, to everyone a loaf of bread and a piece of meat, implied, and a cake of raisins. So all the people departed, everyone to his house. Then David returned to bless his household, and Michal, the daughter of Shaul, came out to meet David and said, notice, you can hear the tone of her voice when she said this. She said, how glorious was the king of Israel today, uncovering himself today in the eyes of the maids of his servants, as one of the base fellows shamelessly uncovers himself. Can you just hear the poison in her mouth? So David said to Michal, it was before Yahweh, who chose me instead of your father and all his house to appoint me ruler over the people of Yahweh, over Israel. Therefore I will play before Yahweh. He's going to celebrate. And I will be even more undignified than this, and will be humble in my own sight. You see, most people want to keep up a facade that they are, even when their heart is far from him. He said, those are the people, you give me lip service, but your heart far from me. The word of Yahweh is the sword which separates, goes in. It can separate who you really are. It can separate the truth from the reality. You may think that you see yourself in a certain way, but Yahweh sees you another way. But as for the maidservants of whom you have spoken, by them I will be held in honor. Therefore Michal, the daughter of Shaul, had no children to the day of her death. Now it came to pass, when the king was dwelling in his house, and Yahweh had given him rest from all his enemies all around, the king said to Nathan the prophet, said, see, now I dwell in a house of cedar, but the ark of Yahweh dwells inside tent curtains. Then Nathan said to the king, go, do all that's in your heart, for Yahweh is with you. But it happened that night that the word of Yahweh came to Nathan, saying, go and tell my servant David, thus says Yahweh, would you build a house for me to dwell in? For I have not dwelt in a house since the time that I brought the children of Israel up from Egypt, even to this day, but have moved about in a tent and in a tabernacle. In all the places where I have walked with all the sons of Israel have I ever spoken a word to anyone from the tribes of Israel, whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, saying, Why have you not built me a house of cedar? Where in all of Scripture did Yahweh ever tell anybody to build him a house? It's not there. David wanted to, but he said, no, you're not going to, but then he let his son do it. But Yahweh never actually told Solomon to build him a house or a temple, did he? David had the idea, Yahweh wouldn't let him do it. So if Yahweh never told anybody to build him a house for him to live in, where does anybody ever get the idea, God told me to build this house of God? Where did it come from? It's not in Scripture. So where did they get the idea? The Spirit told them? It wasn't the word of the Spirit of Yahweh. Whose idea was it? Most of them build those things to do what? To build a kingdom for themselves. I mean, and if I really get the people snowed, you know, I can have 25,000, 30,000 people here, and if they all give $30,000 a year, boy, I make a lot of money. Think about it. The pagan places where Yahweh sent them into, he said they had what? A pagan temple and place of worship under every green tree and on every high hill. We got places of worship, pagan worship right now on every street corner just about. Are they doing what Yahweh said do? Are they following His instructions? Are they teaching His words? If they're not, what are they doing? If they're not doing what He said do or teaching what He said teach, then who put them there? Who are they following? I mean, I'm not trying to come at it because I'm not saying there's not some good people in there, but eventually those who want to will come out. Those who are truly seeking Him will come out, right? But what are they doing? And people that get in there and get satisfied to be there and they're happy and they're fat, you know, and you say, why are you here? I don't know, Mom and Daddy were here. Why are you, whatever you are? Well, that's what Mom and Daddy were. Why do you do it? They don't have any idea why. They're just there. You know, well, you know, liquor joint don't open till noon anyway, so it don't do me no good, you know, go anywhere else before then. Or whatever. Shall we go to Acts? Acts chapter 14. Y'all doing good. We don't have much more. Acts chapter 14. These two chapters in the book of Acts, I think, are very, very illustrious in some of the truths that we glean from them. You know, if we begin to look at it as what's really said. Beginning in the book of Acts chapter 14 and verse 1, it said, now it happened, well, wait a minute. Let's go back to verse 51 of 13. These people were ministering. And some of these people that were ministering the word of Yahweh, kind of like we try to do today, a lot of people that they were trying to minister to would not have anything to do with them and just flat rejected the word. So what did they do? Verse 51. But they shook off the dust from their feet against him and came to Iconium. And the disciples, remember, disciples is where we get our word discipline, and it means the students. In the Hebrew, it's the word talmidim. The disciples, the students, were filled with joy and with the Holy Spirit, the set-apart breath, the word of Yahweh. They were ministering the word, but the people rejected it, and it said they shook off the dust from their feet. Remember Messiah, when he knelt down in John, he wrote with his finger in the dust. What was he writing? He said, what? Going back to Jeremiah, all those who reject me shall be written in the dust. He was writing the names of those who rejected him because they were all looking for some reason to kill him. And then here these people are here, when they reject the word of Yahweh, it says, you just go away, shake the dust from off your feet. It's the same thing as saying, they're written in the dust. Shake the dust off your feet and go on. That's a hard thought, isn't it? That doesn't sound very humanitarian, does it? Now it happened in Iconium, verse 1, chapter 14, that they went together to the synagogue of the Yehudi, and so spoke that a great multitude, both of the Yehudi and of the Greeks, believed. But the unbelieving Yehudi stirred up the Gentiles and poisoned or embittered their minds against the brethren. Therefore they stayed there a long time, speaking boldly in Yahweh, or Yehoshua, who was bearing witness to the word of his grace, granting signs and wonders to be done by their hands. These disciples were walking in obedience, and Yahweh gave signs and wonders by their hands, the ones that were walking in obedience. But the multitude of the city was divided. Part sided with the Yehudi and part with the apostles. And when a violent attempt was made by both the Gentiles and the Yehudi with their rulers to abuse and stone them, they became aware of it and fled to Lystra and Derbe, cities of Lycaonia, and to the surrounding region. And they were preaching the gospel there. And in Lystra a certain man without strength in his feet was sitting, a cripple from his mother's womb, who had never walked. The man heard Paul speaking, Paul observing him intently, and seeing that he had faith or trust to be healed, said with a loud voice, "Stand up straight on your feet." And he leaped and walked. Paul said this. Why would the words of Paul have such an impact? He was teaching the truth of what Yahweh said. He said, "Those who obey me, what? I'll not put any of the diseases on you." And he saw this man there who had strength or trust in his word. A lot of people say they trust in his word, but they're really not walking in full trust yet. Well, we're kind of, sort of, you know. Well, maybe. Well, I'll have more faith tomorrow. I mean, there's all kinds of things that get in our way. Verse 11, now when the people saw what Paul had done, they raised their voices, saying in the Lycaonian, "The gods have come down to us in the likeness of men." And Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. Paul, they called him Hermes because he was the chief speaker, but they called Barnabas Zeus. Actually, in verse 12, in most Bibles it has the word Jupiter. Okay? Jupiter, if you look at the number there, in the Greek it's the number 2203. But the word Jupiter is Latin. Jupiter is Latin for the Greek word dis, aka Jove, actually the word Zeus. So they were calling him, Barnabas they were calling Zeus. And they were calling Paul what? Hermes. Actually in the Greek text there, the number is 2060, and it's the Greek word Mercurius, which we call today Mercury. Hermes would be the word, Hermes. And Hermes was the name of the messenger of the Greek deities. So Hermes was supposed to be the messenger of the gods. And since Paul was the one doing most of the talking, they figured he was the messenger of the gods, so he was called Hermes, or Roman or Latin Mercury. Y'all ever realize that we got this symbol of Mercury, you know, with the wings on his ankles and the helmet with the wings and everything, and man, just nearly every florist shop in the world has Mercury as their symbol. He's a messenger of the gods. I wonder what they're trying to say. And they're trying to sell you an idea of bringing flowers. When somebody's dead, you're supposed to bring flowers. Does it help the dead? It makes the guy that sold them to you rich. You might ever go to a Jewish funeral? Do they bring flowers? No. What do? They bring a rock and lay on the stone. Rock's permanent. Rock. The rock of our salvation. I wonder why they do that. Messiah was known as a rock. There's an awful lot of things that happen in Jewish tradition today that go back to the truth and the teaching of Messiah Yahushua, but they don't know it. They've turned it into something else. They like to say that Isaiah chapter 53, the righteous servant it talks about, is what? Israel. If Israel had been so righteous, my question is, why did Yahweh scatter them for all those different? Why did he say he was going to vomit them out of the land because of their disobedience? Why did they say they're righteous? Anything to go against Messiah. Anyway, verse 13. Then the priest of Zeus. Remember this? They were in Greece, right? And who was the chief gods of Greece? Zeus. The priest of Zeus, whose temple was in front of their city, brought oxen and garlands to the gates, intending to sacrifice with the multitude. You realize all them people standing there to listen to Paul and Barnabas thought that they were Zeus and Hermes. And they fixing to go do all these sacrifices to these Greek gods. Verse 14, but when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard this, they tore their clothes and ran in among the multitude, crying out and saying, Men, why are you doing these things? We also are men with the same nature as you, and preach to you that you should turn from these vain things to the living El Elohim, who made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and all the things that are in them, who in bygone generations allowed all nations to walk in their own ways. Nevertheless, he did not leave himself without witness, in that he did good, gave us rain from heaven and fruitful seasons, filling our hearts with food and gladness. And with these sayings, they could scarcely restrain the multitudes from sacrificing to them. Even though he's preaching, they still wanted to sacrifice to their gods. You see, people love rituals. They love the rituals because it makes it feel like, well, if I've done something, then I have entered into my part of my salvation. There ain't nothing you can do to earn your salvation. You can't walk in Torah to earn your salvation. All you can do is accept what Messiah Yahushua has done for you. And because he has given you that deliverance, then you walk in obedience to his word because of what he's done for you. Not in order to get him to do it. But you know, no matter sometimes how many times you tell people, I'm not trying to earn my salvation, they don't believe you. I mean, they've been conditioned. Verse 19, then Yehudi from Antioch and Iconium came there. The Yehudi, these are the people of the land now. And having persuaded the multitude, they stoned Paul, dragged him out of the city, supposing him to be dead. I would submit to you, none of us have been stoned to death yet for what we're trying to teach. Sometimes it may feel like it. But we haven't shed blood yet. However, when the disciples gathered around him, he rose up and went into the city, and the next day he departed with Barnabas to Derbe. And when they had preached the gospel, the good news, to that city and made many disciples, they returned to Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch, strengthening the souls of the disciples, exhorting them to continue in the faith. Remember, if you look up the word faith in Webster's, the first definition of the word faith is trust. You don't just have faith and just believe it because something said it. You trust what his word says. That's the anchor. Then you know exactly what it is you're following. You know what you're trusting in. They continued in the faith and saying, we must, through many tribulations, enter the kingdom of Yahweh. Through many tribulations. The gate is narrow. And few there are who find it. And I think all of us here have realized that the more we study and the more we realize, and the more narrow that gate becomes. Verse 23, so when they had appointed elders in every ecclesia or every group and prayed with fasting, they commended them to Yahweh in whom they had believed. And after they had passed through Pisidia, they came to Pamphylia. Now when they had preached the word in Perga, they went down to Attalia. From there they sailed to Antioch, where they had been commended to the grace of Yahweh for the work which they had completed. And when they had come and gathered the ecclesia together, they reported all that Yahweh had done with them, and that he had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles, the nations. So they stayed there a long time with the disciples. Remember, the house of Israel is scattered among all these Gentile nations. Salvation, deliverance has come to the Gentile nations in order to reach the lost sheep of the house of Israel, which are scattered among the Gentiles. That's why Paul said, boy, my ministry just got real big. Because he's going to have to reach all the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And when the Gentiles begin to accept the word and begin to crowd in, then Israel would be jealous and come. Got nothing to do with Judah. He already said, you know, when Judah turned to Messiah Yahushua, then the veil comes off and they can see him in the scriptures. But until Judah begins to look for Messiah, they're never going to see him. Chapter 15. And this is one that so many people use and misuse and everything else. Verse 1, and certain ones came down from Judea and taught the brethren, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moshe, you cannot be saved. Or they're saying if you ain't circumcised, you ain't saved.
That's wrong.
Or delivered. But the question we all have to recognize, if we already know Torah, then we know that what's being reported here can't be true, because Abraham, it was considered righteousness for him when he believed Yahweh and did what he said do, and that was before he was circumcised. Why? So that he could become the father of the circumcised as well as the uncircumcised. So circumcision is not a requirement to be delivered. Therefore, when Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and dispute with them, they determined that Paul and Barnabas and certain others of them should go up to Jerusalem to the apostles and elders about this question. What question? Whether you had to be circumcised to be saved or not. So being sent on their way by the ecclesia, they passed through Phoenicia and Samaria, describing the conversion of the Gentiles, and they caused great joy to all the brethren. And when they had come to Jerusalem, they were received by the ecclesia and the apostles and the elders, and they reported all things that Yahweh had done with them. But some of the sect of the Pharisees who believed rose up, saying, "It is necessary to circumcise them and to command to keep the Torah of Moses." You see, they're trying to say that circumcision and keeping the Torah will get you saved. Not Messiah. What did Messiah say? No one comes to the Father but by me. You can do any kind of law or rule you want to, whether it's a whatever. Verse 6, so the apostles and the elders came together to discuss this matter. And when there had been much dispute, Peter rose up and said to them, "Men and brethren, you know that a good while ago Yahweh chose among us that by my mouth the Gentiles should hear the word of the gospel and believe." You know, if we go back, this is where he sent Peter down to Cornelius, you know, who was a Gentile, Roman. And it was through them that they heard the truth through the mouth of Peter. And that's what he's talking about. So Yahweh, who knows the heart, acknowledges them by giving them the Holy Spirit, the set-apart witness, just as he did to us, and made no distinction between us and them. One more sign. It just seemed like a long time. Okay. Verse 9 again, and made no distinction between us and them, purifying their hearts by faith, that is, by trust. Your purification comes by trusting Yahweh. If you trust Him and believe what He said, then you do what He told you to do. If you don't trust and if you don't love, then you don't do what He said. It's simple as that. Verse 10, now therefore why do you test Yahweh by putting a yoke on the neck of the disciple, which neither our fathers nor we were able to bear? Is he saying that none of them could do the law? No, he's saying none of them could do the law for salvation. Nobody can. There was never a law that could make you saved. If there was a law that could get you saved, Messiah didn't need to die, did he? Can the law be changed? If the law can be changed, why didn't he change it so he wouldn't have to die? Can't be. Verse 11, but we believe that through the grace of Yahweh, Yehoshua the Mashiach, we shall be saved in the same manner as they. Everybody's saved the same way. Through the shed blood of Messiah. That's where your deliverance comes through. Then all the multitude kept silent and listened to Barnabas and Paul, declaring how many miracles and wonders Yahweh had worked through them among the Gentiles. And after they had become silent, James, Yaakov, answered, saying, Men, brethren, listen to me. Now remember, James, Yaakov, the brother of Yehoshua, was kind of like the chief, you know, there in the temple in Jerusalem. Verse 14, it says, Simon has declared how Yahweh at the first visited the Gentiles to take out of them a people for his name. And with this the words of the prophets agree, just as it is written, after this I will return and will rebuild the tabernacle of David which is fallen down. Remember in Samuel we read about that tabernacle. He built a tent to bring the ark up into. And he said, I'm going to rebuild that which is fallen down. I mean, think about that. We get to think about David. We never really thought about maybe it was Yahweh wanted him to build a tent and he put the thing inside the tent. Not a temple. The tent. And then Peter said what? When I put off this tent. He used the same word to describe the body. And then we're told in many places our body has now become the temple or the tent of Yahweh to live in. If His word does not live in you, then He don't. I mean, does that make sense? After this I will return and will rebuild the tabernacle of David which has fallen down. I will rebuild its ruins and I will set it up so that the rest of mankind may seek Yahweh. Even all the Gentiles, the nations who are called by my name, says Yahweh, who does all these things. Go to Amos chapter 9. In the book of Amos, in chapter 9, Now, when we read in the prophecy of Amos, okay, remember the name Amos means to carry or to lift up the burden, to carry the burden. We're supposed to help one another carry a burden, right? So Amos is derived from the Hebrew word amos, meaning to lift a burden or to carry. Therefore, his name means the burden or even the burden bearer. So here in Amos in chapter 9, and remember, this is a prophecy a long time ago. In verse 11, most Bibles have the phrase, on that day. The actual Hebrew says, in the day that I will raise up the tabernacle of David, which has fallen down, and repair its damages. I will raise up its ruins and rebuild it as in the days of old, that they may possess the remnant of Edom. Who is Edom? Esau. Who is Esau? The brother of Yaakov. Okay? We just got through reading and studying, before on Isaiah 11, that the two, we read it during the feast, and that he's going to come back and he's going to join the house of Judah with the house of Israel. Together they're going to fly down against the Palestinians, the Philistines, and then they're going to turn and they're going to come back and they're going to conquer what? Edom and Moab and all those others. Here is saying the same thing in Amos. But it has to do with the building up or the rebuilding of the tent of David. Verse 12, that they may possess the remnant of Edom and all the Gentiles and nations who are called by my name, says Yahweh, who does this thing. If we go back to where we were reading there in Acts, and he's quoting this passage from Amos, he's still talking about what the prophet said, and prophets uses, Yahweh, and this is talking about Yehoshua. They got to be one and the same. We read the scriptures where it says Yehoshua is going to come back and his feet are going to touch down on the Mount of Olives. If you read in Zechariah that Yahweh is going to come back and Yahweh's feet are going to touch down the Mount of Olives, well, Yahweh's a spirit, he ain't got no feet. Whose feet? It's got to be Yehoshua. Verse 18, had known to Yahweh from eternity are all his works. He said he knows everything. Therefore I judge that we should not trouble those from among the nations who are turning to Yahweh. Now remember, they were going out saying, you got to be what? You got to be circumcised and keep the commandments before you can be delivered. But we judge, I judge we should not trouble those from among the nations who are turning to Yahweh, but that we write to them to abstain from things polluted by idols. Got to stay away from idolatry. Sexual immorality. That means you can't go down there to them goddesses and all them temples down there and have sex with them so your crops will be prosperous. That's what them fertility goddesses were all about. That's what all that stuff was. You got to stay away from the sexual immorality. From things strangled. If something's strangled, it's got blood in it, you can't eat the flesh with the blood in it. And from blood. A lot of them people, would eat blood, drink blood, do all kinds of stuff, all kinds of pagan practices. Think about it right now. If you're trying to talk to somebody that's coming out of some type of pagan religion of some kind, where they had the sex, remember they got the religions, with the sex goddesses out of Egypt and all this stuff. They got religions where they drink blood. You can see them on there's a show somewhere called Taboo, and it goes through all these different things that these nations and lands and people have, the things they do. It's kind of like saying, look, if you're going to come in, these are the things that you've got to quit doing right now. Does this mean that that's all you got to do in your life? You got to quit drinking the blood. You got to quit having anything to do with idols. You got to quit, to strangle things, and no more of that sex stuff. Verse 21 is the explanatory note. For Moshe has had throughout many generations those who preach him in every city, being read in the synagogue every Sabbath. All he's saying to them is, you don't have to tell them that they got to go get circumcised, or they got to do this, or they got to do that. You just tell them you got to quit doing these things, and then you're going to be going in the synagogue on the Sabbath day. These are Gentiles coming out of the nation. Then you're going to start going to synagogues, and what are you going to hear every Sabbath? The Torah being read every week. And as they learn the Torah, and the Torah becomes who they are, then the Word of Yahweh will tell them what He wants them to do and how they want to live. You don't have to put rules and regulations on people. The Word will change those people. Only the Word of Yahweh will change people. We can't. Then it pleased the apostles and the elders. But notice he's not saying that these are only the 4 things that they have to do. He said, man, you got to quit doing these things because you're going to learn the rest of what you got to do when you go to synagogue and study the Torah. That's what he's saying.
Notice
Really
he
simple.
didn't tell them they had to quit eating pork,
Huh?
because that wasn't considered food.
No, he didn't tell them not to eat pork because it wasn't, you're right. It's not even listed as food. You learn that when you read Leviticus 11. You're not supposed to eat pork. You don't have to tell people you can or can't, but you tell them, when you come in here, you know, don't bring this, you know, don't bring no food, you know, we'll have food here, you can eat what's here. But after you go for a while, then you learn the things that you can do and what you can't do, right? But if you tell them don't do these things up front, then they're not embarrassed and you're not embarrassed trying to, you know, fix or correct or something. Then everybody can get along, right? And then what's going to dictate what you do or don't do? What the Word says, not somebody else. You don't have to go back and say, well, they won't let me. No, Yahweh said I can't. That's the difference. That way your life is being dictated to you by what His Word says. Verse 22, then it pleased the apostles and the elders with the whole ecclesia to send chosen men of their own company to Antioch with Paul and Barnabas, Judas, who was also named Barsabbas, and Silas, leading men among the brethren. They wrote this letter by them. Now notice this is a letter they wrote that they carried with them when they go up there. The apostles, the elders, and the brethren, to the brethren who are of the Gentiles in Antioch, Syria, and Cilicia, greetings. Since we have heard that some who went out from us have troubled you with words, unsettling your souls, saying, you must be circumcised and keep the law, to whom we gave no such commandment. For one thing, they can't get circumcised and keep the law because they don't know what it is. They don't even know what, you know, how are we going to do that? But he said, it seemed good to us, being assembled with one accord, or one purpose, or one mind, to send chosen men to you with our beloved Barnabas and Paul. Men who have risked their lives for the name of our Master, Yehoshua the Mashiach. We have therefore sent Judas and Silas, who will also report the same things by word of mouth. They got out of the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. They got 4 of them going. This gives you 4 witnesses of what they did. And they got a written letter. For it seemed good to the set-apart breath, the Word, and to us to lay upon you no greater burden than these necessary things, that you abstain from things offered to idols, from blood, from things strangled, and from sexual immorality. If you keep yourselves from these, you will do well. It doesn't say you're going to be delivered. You keep yourself from these, you'll do well, because they're going to be going in the synagogues and learning the rest of what Yahweh wants them to do. You see the difference? There's not just 4 things that the Gentiles got to do. Yahweh doesn't have different laws for different people. If He did, then He would be a respecter of persons, and the Scripture says He's no respecter of persons. So whoever does will receive. That's what it says. If you will, I will. If you don't, He don't. If you keep yourselves from these, you will do farewell. So when they were sent off, they came to Antioch, and when they had gathered the multitude together, they delivered the letter. When they had read it, they rejoiced over its encouragement. Now Judas and Silas, themselves being prophets also. What is a prophet? One who speaks the inspired word of Yahweh. A prophet can be anybody going out giving the word of Yahweh to somebody else. Right? Now Judas and Silas, themselves being prophets also, exhorted the brethren with many words and strengthened them. And after they had stayed for a time, they were sent back with greetings from the brethren to the apostles. However, it seemed good to Silas to remain there. Paul and Barnabas also remained in Antioch, teaching and preaching the word of Yahweh with many others also. Since there was no other New Testament written yet, they were teaching the word of Yahweh. What were they teaching? Tanakh. Then after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, let us now go back and visit our brethren in every city where we have preached or proclaimed the word of Yahweh, and see how they are doing. Now Barnabas was determined to take with them John, called Mark. We have the Gospel of Mark. But Paul insisted that they should not take with them the one who had departed from them in Pamphylia and had not gone with them to the work. Boy, they're getting a big argument here over who they're going to take. Paul didn't want that Mark guy. Barnabas did. Then the contention became so sharp that they parted from one another. You know, you read over that so quick and so fast, you never think about it. These 2 guys were mad. They were angry. They were getting so angry over this one called John Mark, they separated between the 2 of them themselves. We're never told that they were ever reconciled. We're never told exactly what it was that he did other than what it says here. We're never told that anybody asked for forgiveness, was forgiven, or anything else. But later on we read where Paul said what? Bring Mark, for he is profitable for me. Somehow or other, the differences got repaired, but we're never told exactly how. Again, in verse 39, then the contention became so sharp that they parted from one another, and so Barnabas took Mark and sailed to Cyprus. But Paul chose Silas and departed, being commended by the brethren to the grace or the favor of Yahweh. And he went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening or exhorting the ecclesia, the called out ones. And that'll conclude the readings and the studies for this day.